Chapter 235. They went out of the gate of the courtyard. When Shichi walked to a path on the left, Qin Wanru hesitated for a moment, but she didn't stop and followed him. Yujie followed her closely 2 steps behind her. After a few steps, they turned a corner and saw a bamboo forest. The bamboo leaves rose and fell in the wind, which inexplicably made people feel desolate. When Shichi kept walking forward with his hands clasped behind his back, but he didn't walk fast, so that Qin Wanru could catch up with him. They walked all the way until they reached another corner. When Shichi stopped, turned his head, and looked at Qin Wanru with confusion. Qin Wanru smiled slightly, took 2 steps forward, and bowed sideways to him. When Shichi raised his head, and his handsome eyes still fell on Qin Wanru's face. He still looked confused. Qin Wanru felt a little embarrassed under his gaze. She coughed in a low voice and was about to say something to break the awkward situation. However, when Shichi turned around again and said slowly while walking, "My cousin grew up in our mansion. She doesn't like to go out and has almost no good relationship with other misses. My brothers and I all treat her as a younger sister." Qin Wanru was stunned at first, and then she smiled and said while walking, "Your cousin is really an introvert." This meant that when Shichi had listened to what she said that day, this was good. Her warning worked. With Shichi's intelligence, if he had not thought that his brother would hurt him, he would never have been hurt. "So, second Miss Qin, tell me, how do you know about my cousin? And how do you know that there is something between my second brother and my cousin?" When Shichi suddenly stopped and turned around, his sharp eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face. His eyes were deep, and his gaze was aggressive. He had never doubted the relationship between his second brother and his cousin before, but after Qin Wanru said so, he sent someone to investigate it. After the investigation, he was shocked. He had never thought that his second brother had such a good relationship with his cousin, and they even had an ambiguous relationship in private. In the past, his second brother had always cared about his cousin, but in Shichi's eyes, it was just a brother's love for his younger sister. They grew up together. He had never had this kind of thought, and he thought his second brother had never had this kind of thought. In fact, his second brother and his cousin had an ambiguous relationship, but on the other hand, his cousin cared about him very much, which even made him feel uncomfortable sometimes. "I don't know, but I've been dreaming for a few days. It's all about third young master being killed by second young master. I didn't take it seriously at first because I didn't know you at that time. But after I saw you, I felt that it should be you. But I don't know if my dream is real or not, so I just take it as a warning. It's good if there isn't, but if there is, I better be careful." Qin Wanru had long prepared these words. She pondered for a moment, turned her watery eyes out, and looked at several tall bamboos and said slowly and quietly. Being reborn was her biggest secret, and this secret was too shocking. If people knew about it, they would probably treat her as a demon and punish her. How could she warn him without batting an eyelid and make him listen? She needed a reasonable explanation. Otherwise, based on her understanding of Shichi, he would not listen to her. Therefore, he was able to convey some of the things he had seen in his previous life through a dream. Although it was a strange mistake, at least in the ears of some people, it should be something that could be explained. Of course, Qin Wanru didn't think that Shichi was one of them. But so what? Perhaps he would believe her after a few more times. Anyway, no matter how smart he was, he couldn't explain such a strange thing. If she hadn't been reincarnated, she wouldn't believe that such a thing existed in this world. "Second Miss Qin, you have never had any contact with our mansion and you did not know me before. Why did you have this dream again and remember it so clearly? What you think about in the day, you dream at night. Even a dream can't be completely illusory." When Shichi's eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face, there was a strange peace in his eyes, as if he really believed it, but his words were still sharp. In fact, this Shichi was not the person Qin Wanru was familiar with. In the past, Shichi had always been gentle to Qin Wanru. Even when he was tortured by the disease and was dying, he still smiled gently and had never been so aggressive to Qin Wanru. "I don't know why, or have we met before?" Qin Wanru suppressed a trace of fear in her heart and turned her head to look at Shichi up and down. She looked inexplicable, as if she was really confused. Second Miss Qin, you must be joking. Second Miss Qin has never been to the capital city, and I have never been out of the capital city. As for my cousin, it is impossible for anyone to know. When Shichi fixed his eyes on Qin Wanru, not letting go of the slight expression on her face. Such a gaze made Qin Wanru quite uncomfortable. This one Shichi was so different from the one Shichi in her memory. Could it be that because of her rebirth, when Shichi's character also changed? I really don't know. When I saw you, I just knew that I met you in my dream. Maybe this can be called the fate of the previous life. Qin Wanru bit the corner of her red lips, pinched the handkerchief in her hand, and lowered her head. Such a burning gaze made her feel very uneasy. She was afraid that if she raised her head to look at Wen Shichi again, he would notice something. Second Miss Qin is the daughter of Ningyuan Army General. I heard that Ningyuan Army General was a general in charge of defense when he was in Jiangzhou. When the rebel army rebelled, he became famous overnight. Now that he has come to the capital city, no one expected that he would become a new noble in the capital city. I think Ningyuan Army General is a very talented and knowledgeable person. When Shichi suddenly smiled, and his eyes became gentle because of the smile. He thought of a possibility, which seemed to make sense. Why did the second Miss of Qin's mansion know about the affairs of his mansion and even know about his cousin sister and second brothers so well? This Ningyuan Army General was really not an ordinary person, but his hands were too long. He had just come to the capital city, but he dared to extend his hands to other powerful officials' mansions. Was he not afraid that others would chop his hands off? Hearing Wen Shichi's words, Qin Wanru knew that he misunderstood. He thought that it was all found out by her father, and then he used her to please him. She raised her head helplessly and said sincerely, "If third young master Wen thinks so, I can't do anything about it. I just want to tell you to be careful of the people around you. As for other things, you really think too much." I think too much? When Shichi's eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face again. Of course, third young master Wen thinks too much. Qin Wanru's long eyelashes fluttered, and she said affirmatively again. She didn't expect that her warning would be so successful. What Wen Shichi said just now actually showed that he took it seriously. He didn't even ask if it was true, which also meant that he had found something. This made Qin Wanru feel a little relieved, but she was also worried. When Shichi suspected him, or rather his father, why didn't he know that Wen Shichi was such a suspicious person before? Second Miss Qin, have you not been engaged yet? When Shichi suddenly looked Qin Wanru up and down and said ambiguously. Qin Wanru was stunned for a moment, and then said with a little shame and anger, "What does it have to do with you? This kind of thing could not be discussed between a man and a woman in private. Does your father intend to marry you into our mansion?" When Shichi suddenly said. His words were too straightforward, and the meaning in it shocked Qin Wanru so much that she stared at Wen Shichi with her bright watery eyes and couldn't even say a word for a moment. Your father didn't mention it? Wen Shichi looked very calm. His handsome eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face, and he calmly analyzed the expression on her face. He found that she was really shocked, and he secretly frowned. Is it not what I think? Third young master Wen, do you suspect that I have an ulterior motive for approaching you? Do I want to marry into your mansion? Or do I want to marry into your mansion? In her last life, Qin Wanru had never hidden too many thoughts in front of Wen Shichi. At this time, when her good intention was suspected like this, she was inexplicably angry and blurted out. Isn't it? Wen Shichi asked in reply. If third young master Wen thinks so, you can ignore what I said before. As for other things, third young master Wen, you really think too much. Perhaps when I first saw you, I felt that you seemed to be someone I knew and was familiar with, but that was also because of the scene in my dream. There was no other meaning at all. Third young master Wen, you are a young master from a big family, so you should have heard that one should not speak in decency. After Qin Wanru finished speaking, she turned around and walked back the way she came. She was really a little angry. She had guessed all kinds of reactions from Wen Shichi, including disbelief, doubt, and surprise, but these were all for his second brother and cousin sister. Unexpectedly, he believed her but doubted her. Moreover, he even suspected that she was deliberately mystifying in order to marry him. Could it be that the Shichi she met in her last life, who was very trusting of others, was fake? Seeing Qin Wanru leave angrily, Shichi stood still with his hands clasped behind his back and his eyebrows tightly wrinkled. For a moment, he actually wanted to stop her, which gave him a very strange feeling. This strange feeling had been existing since he found out what had happened in his mansion. He had never thought that his second brother would actually have malicious intentions towards him. He had never thought that his cousin, who had always been gentle, would actually be such a woman in private. He had never thought that his cousin would say such things to his second brother. There were many things that he had never maliciously suspected about his family before. But these were all true. What was even more strange was that these things actually came from a boudoir girl who had never had anything to do with his mansion, which made him have to think more deeply. Did someone want to plot against his mansion? Standing on the path and watching Qin Wanru's figure disappear from his sight, Shichi withdrew his gaze and began to ponder. Chapter 236. After nodding, Shichi raised his eyes and looked in the direction of Qin Wanru's message. He felt inexplicably upset. In fact, part of the reason why he came to Huaguang Temple in advance this time was to see Qin Wanru early and inquire about the news. But now he found that he still knew nothing. This feeling was like a light smoke that could not be grasped, which made Shichi very uncomfortable. Yes, very uncomfortable. Or a very uncomfortable feeling. He must find out about this matter. He turned around and strode away. The moment Qin Wanru entered the yard with Yu Jie, she was stopped by Chun Yi timidly. Qin Wanru didn't want to pay attention to Qi Rongji, but after taking 2 steps, she turned a corner and re-entered Qi Rongji's room. She felt that there was something wrong. Qi Rongji's message must have been passed on by someone, and there were even some schemes that she did not know. After entering the room, she did not sit down, but looked at Qi Rongji who had already stood up. "What's the matter?" "Qin Wanru, you are really a bitch." Qi Rongji gritted her teeth and stood up. She reached out to slap Qin Wanru, but was quickly stopped by Yu Jie. "Qi Rongji, you're living in Qin's mansion now and you're relying on Qin's mansion. This is not Jiangzhou. I really don't know where you get the confidence to think that I'll tolerate you again and again," Qin Wanru said coldly. She raised her bright watery eyes and looked at Qi Rongji's face coldly. He's the one I've chosen. Why are you trying to snatch him from me? Qin Wanru, what on earth do I owe you? Why do you ruin my plans again and again? Qi Rongji looked at Qin Wanru with hatred, her eyes almost spurting fire. The person you chose? Qi Rongji, is this the rule of your Qi's mansion? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and asked calmly. Her intuition told her that there was something wrong. Qi Rongji could not be so ignorant. Of course I chose him, or your father and grandmother promised my father to help me find a blind date and chose him, Qi Rongji said with hatred. Qin Wanru was stunned. She looked at Qi Rongji with slight surprise and repeated, "The person my father and grandmother chose for you?" "Yes, he is the one your father and grandmother chose for me." "Qin Wanru, don't you know that I even lost my marriage because of your family? Your mansion owes me this." Qi Rongji glared at Qin Wanru and said, "The affairs between the Qin's mansion and the Qi's mansion were intertwined and restrained each other. But the cause was really because of the broken engagement between Madame D and Qin Yuru. So, in order to make up for it, father and grandmother wanted to help you choose a good marriage to compensate the Qi clan. And this time, father chose the 3rd young master of the left minister's residence?" Qin Wanru sat down on the chair beside her and asked lightly. "Yes, 3rd young master Wen is not only good-looking, but also talented. I heard that he will take part in the Imperial examination this time. With his talent, there should be no big problem," Qi Rongji said proudly, as if Shichi had a relationship with her now. "You came to Huaguang Temple this time because of this? Did my father tell you that?" Qin Wanru asked casually as she carefully sorted out Qi Rongji's words. Almost. Qi Rongji raised her head and said directly. "What do you mean by almost? Did my father tell you personally, or did someone else pass it on? If it was passed on by someone else, Why did my father pass it on to someone else? Looking at Qi Rongji's expression, Qin Wanru knew that there was something fishy in the so-called looking at each other. As for her father, the thing about Qin Yuru had made him dizzy before. At this time, he had no energy to help Qi Rongji build a bridge and look at Wenshichi. But thinking of Wenshichi's words just now, she inexplicably felt that there was something behind it. Otherwise, Wenshichi would not say this to her. Could it be that her father really had contact with the left minister's residence, and this contact directly caused Wenshichi to misunderstand her? Although she did not want to admit it, Qin Wanru still felt that there was a trace of possibility. Even if your father did not tell me personally, it is almost the same. It is better for me to look at each other. Now I also feel that it is very good. But why are you so close to third young Master One? You even hang out with him. You are a man and a woman alone. Aren't you afraid that your reputation will be tarnished? Qi Rongji snorted and said unwillingly. Then she changed her expression into a sad one. Qin Wanru, you are still young and good-looking. Your father is now a new noble in the capital city. What kind of man can you not marry? Do you have to steal the man I like? What happened in Jiangzhou was caused by our ignorance. It is not a life-and-death feud. Do you have to hate me so much that you want to ruin my marriage? Not a life-and-death feud? Qin Wanru's eyes fell on Qi Rongji's beautiful face, and her lips slightly curved into a sneer. If she really died, how could she find her to take revenge? She would never forget that Qi Rongji had either wanted to disfigure her or kill her. This was not a life-and-death feud because she had not been killed by Qi Rongji at that time. Qi Rongji, is it possible that what you said was deliberately revealed to you? I can be sure that Grandma must not know about it. Otherwise, she would have asked third young Master One to stay a little longer and would have mentioned you more. Qin Wanru said calmly. Even if your grandma does not know, your father must know. This matter is mainly because of him. Qi Rongji felt guilty, but she still said loudly. He has seen third young Master One? Qin Wanru's eyes flickered. She really didn't know the relationship between Qin Huaiyong and Wenshichi. After all, in terms of age, they were not suitable for each other. Even if they met by chance, it was unlikely. Then they really met for a purpose. But what could Qin Huaiyong and Wenshichi talk about? Something slipped through her mind, but she could not grasp it for a moment. So today you went up the mountain to pretend to be sick because you know that third young Master One is proficient in medical skills and you also know that he is in Huaguang Temple? Qin Wanru asked carefully. Yes, I just know. I heard that your father will also come to see him. Anyway, he is helping me to look for him, so I come to see him first. Qi Rongji said in a coquettish manner. You should know this from the words of several servant girls or old maids, right? I guess my father will definitely not tell you about this. My father has not been in the capital for a long time, and now he has just decided. Even if he helps you to look for someone, he will definitely tell your parents first, and then formally discuss this matter. Qin Wanru's cold eyes fell on Qi Rongji, as if she could see through her heart. This gaze made Qi Rongji involuntarily turn her head, but she immediately came to her senses and looked at Qin Wanru angrily. She stared at her fiercely and said, So what? What does this matter have to do with you? Of course it has nothing to do with me. Then don't look for me. Qin Wanru coldly turned around and seemed to leave. Seeing that she was really going to leave, Qi Rongji was anxious and choked her throat. Qin Wanru, what do you mean? Why should I look for you? Third young Master One is mine. If you dare to compete with me, I will fight with you. Fight with me? Qin Wanru slightly tilted her head and squinted at Qi Rongji. Qi Rongji only felt that Qin Wanru in front of her had an indescribable majesty and momentum. For a moment, she felt guilty and hateful. She fiercely gritted her teeth and secretly scolded herself for being disappointing. It was just a Qin Wanru. Why should she be afraid of her? She immediately became courageous and snapped, Yes, even at the cost of my life, I will not let you get what you want. Qi Rongji, do you know what this place is? Qin Wanru smiled. Her smile was sweet and elegant, as brilliant as 100 flowers blooming. Even Qi Rongji, who was used to seeing Qin Wanru's face, was stunned at this moment. But the next moment, she immediately looked at Qin Wanru with hostility. Qin Wanru, what do you mean? This is Huaguang Temple, a royal temple. There are mountain roads on the way up and down the mountain. There are countless people coming and going here every day. Among these countless people, if 1 or 2 people are missing, what will happen? Do you think it will be investigated clearly? Qin Wanru smiled slightly. Qi Rongji's heart trembled, and her legs were weak. The momentum that she had tried hard to muster before suddenly dispersed. After a few steps back, she pointed at Qin Wanru and said loudly, What do you want to do? I don't want to do anything. I just want to tell you that if something really happens to you in Huaguang Temple, even if my father has a place with poor supervision, he can do nothing about it. Can your father really become enemies with my father because of you? I heard that your father also wants to go to the capital city. Is there another agreement between you and my father? Qin Wanru said slowly, and her eyes fell on Qi Rongji's body calmly. Qi Rongji was really panicked and trembled all over. In fact, when you went up the mountain today, you were already half dead. Originally, you went up the mountain because you eavesdropped on others' words, and then you casually found an excuse. Grandma and I didn't know anything on the mountain, and you bumped into it. Whatever happens after that has nothing to do with the person behind the scenes, but it can be an excuse to deal with Grandma and me. Qi Rongji, if it is really my father who looks for you, do you really think that all the servants will know before the conclusion is made? Qin Wanru's eyes fell on Qi Rongji with a little sarcasm, but such obvious sarcasm made Qi Rongji's body tremble more and more. Qi Rongji, are you going to be knocked down by a car on the way down the mountain, or are you going to be kidnapped by an unknown gangster? Although it is unlikely that this kind of thing will happen under the rule of the emperor, you are such a weak girl. If you are kidnapped, even if you are sent back, your reputation will be ruined. Qin Wanru said calmly. She knew that Qi Rongji was already suspicious, and she also knew that she was afraid. No, it's impossible. I will go with you. Qi Rongji's face kept changing. After a long while, she gritted her teeth and said, Since someone has a way to send you to Huaguang Temple, he doesn't intend to let you leave easily. Qi Rongji, you should be happy that you can become a useless chess piece to plot against me and Grandma. After all, you have made a lot of trouble with me in the past. Now that you have an accident, he can definitely perfectly push the blame to me. Chapter 237. Tell me what's going on? Qin Wanru nodded and said in a lazy and indifferent voice. Qi Rongji gritted her teeth fiercely, clenched her fists, and then slowly loosened them. Madame of Duke Xing came to the mansion that day and talked with Madame D. I was curious and wanted to see Madame of Duke Xing secretly. I didn't expect to hear 2 old maids talking about my marriage on the way. Qi Rongji paused and looked at Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru still lowered her head, as if she didn't notice Qi Rongji's gaze. She still turned over the handkerchief in her hand slowly. One of the 2 old maids is from Duke Xing's mansion, and the other is Madame D's maid. They talked about the matter that your father helped me to look for the 3rd young master of the left prime minister's mansion. They said that the 3rd young master is like pearls and jade, with a good reputation and a good family background. They also said that if he took the Imperial examination in spring this time, he would definitely pass. At that time, there would be more people who liked him. At that time, there will be more people who will like him, so it's better to choose him earlier. Since she had started, Qi Rongji no longer hid and told them everything. The cause of this matter was an accident, and it was related to Qi Rongji. Hearing the 2 old maids praised the 3rd young master of Wen, Qi Rongji was overjoyed. However, the 2 old maids said that Qin Huaiyong didn't know whether to choose Qi Rongji or Qin Wanru now. Although Qi Rongji was older and Qin's mansion owed the Qi's mansion, Qin Wanru was his daughter after all. Compared with Qi Rongji, Qin Wanru was closer. Then they said that the 3rd young master of Wen happened to be in Huaguang Temple. They also said that Qin Wanru might have seen the 3rd young master of Wen. With Qin Wanru's appearance, the 3rd young master of Wen might have liked her. At that time, Qin Huaiyong didn't need to hesitate anymore. He could leave such a good son-in-law to his daughter. Even if the Qi's mansion asked later, he could only say that it had nothing to do with him and it was the 3rd young master of Wen's choice. Of course, he couldn't blame others for not choosing Qi Rongji. The two old maids even joked that if Qi Rongji knew it now and came up the mountain immediately, she might have a chance. After all, she was good-looking, and compared with Qin Wanru, she was more attractive to men. As for the solution, it was best to pretend to be sick, because it was said that third young master Wen's medical skills were superb. So, in a hurry, you thought of an idea and came up the mountain. After listening to Qi Rongji's words, Qin Wanru had already guessed the cause and effect. With a flash of sharpness in her eyes, she looked at Qi Rongji and asked with contempt and sarcasm in her eyes. "Is there something wrong?" Qi Rongji blushed and scolded her loudly. Even she herself felt that there was something wrong when she retold the story. However, for fear of appearing weak in front of Qin Wanru, she had to force herself to say it. "Qi Rongji, don't tell me you really don't know if there's anything wrong or not. At that time, you will lose your life, and this matter will be pushed to me and my grandmother, even though we know nothing about it. Of course, you're the unluckiest one here. You might lose your life or your reputation, but no matter what, you're completely ruined." Qin Wanru sneered faintly. These words, one after another, struck Qi Rongji like a bolt of lightning. She was dumbfounded and froze on the spot. The blush on her face faded away and turned into a sheet of white. She stood there in a daze. Seeing that she was dumbfounded with fear, Qin Wanru knew that her words had an effect. She said coldly, "At this time, Qi Rongji, you should know who wants to plot against you, right? Madame D and Qin Yuru, it must be them." Qi Rongji's face turned blue again, and she fiercely crumpled the handkerchief in her hand. "It's good that you know." Qin Wanru smiled coldly and turned to leave. "Qin Wanru, don't go. Are you going to be killed by them in vain?" Qi Rongji stepped forward and was about to pull Qin Wanru's sleeve, but was stopped by Yujie. She shouted unwillingly, "It's not me who will get into trouble. Now I've saved your life. As for whether you will take things too hard and get into trouble, I can't do anything about it. Good advice can't persuade a damned person. In this world, many damned people will die again and again. What does it have to do with me?" Qin Wanru stopped slightly, but she didn't turn around and said in a low voice, You're so mean." Qi Rongji's face became more and more ugly. "If you have the ability, you can deal with it yourself. It has nothing to do with me." Qin Wanru smiled slightly, turned around and strode away. She didn't care about Qi Rongji anymore. Behind her came the sound of something falling, and then there were the panicked cries of the two servant girls. It seemed that Qi Rongji vented her anger on something again. "Miss, are you okay?" Yujie quickly caught up with Qin Wanru, looked at Qin Wanru's face carefully, and asked in a low voice. Qin Wanru shook her head and frowned tightly. Now she might be sure that Duke Xing's mansion must have a connection with her. She rubbed the handkerchief in her hand and put it down again. She seemed to have something broken in her heart, but she couldn't find the place to hit the last hammer. Perhaps as long as she hit the last hammer, all the truth could be completely presented in front of everyone. As long as she hit the place with the most strength, it would be all right. But where was the point of strength? She took a deep breath and raised her head. Suddenly, she saw Shui Ruolin's concerned eyes in the corridor. Judging from Shui Ruolin's standing posture, she should have been here for some time. Qin Wanru didn't know how much she had heard. Biting her lip, her eyes were inexplicably filled with tears, and her clear watery eyes were covered with a layer of mist. Seeing Qin Wanru looking at her, Shui Ruolin sighed and walked slowly from the corridor. Her eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face with pity. She walked to Qin Wanru and reached out to hold her in her arms without saying a word. After a long while, Qin Wanru pushed her away and wiped the tears on her face with a handkerchief. When she was about to speak, she saw Shui Ruolin shake her hand and point to the room on the side. It was the place where Shui Ruolin temporarily rested. She had her own room, but she often came to accompany Madame Dowager. Madame Dowager was afraid that Shui Ruolin would be tired, so she specially found a room for Shui Ruolin to rest in. Qin Wanru nodded knowingly. They went to the room where Shui Ruolin temporarily rested one after another. After Qianghua served tea, she retreated to the door. Qin Wanru signaled to Yujie, and Yujie also obediently walked to the door and guarded with Qianghua. Wanru, I don't want to hide something from you, but your grandmother said it's better not to let you know. I actually don't think so. For this kind of thing, whether it's good or not, you have to know it. Your grandmother thinks it's for your own good, but I don't think so. Shui Rulin sighed. She saw some things, but she actually didn't know very clearly. So she just consciously helped Qin Wanru to inquire about information, but she didn't know much. Mother, tell me. Qin Wanru's eyes were slightly red, and she lowered her head. You are not my cousin's biological daughter. Your biological father should have saved my cousin's life, so he entrusted you to my cousin and let my cousin raise you as his biological daughter. But you seem to have a mother who was separated in the war. As for other things, I can't find out for a while. Shui Rulin sighed guiltily and told Qin Wanru the bits and pieces of information she had recently inquired from Madame Dowager and Qin Huayong. I still have a mother? Qin Wanru's watery eyes suddenly widened, and her heart seemed to be hit by something, which was sour and painful. Although she had never asked, it didn't mean that she didn't think about it. Her breath involuntarily became a little faster, and her eyes were full of admiration. Her mother? Was she still alive now? There should be, but her whereabouts are unknown. Later your grandmother also sent people to look for her, but they haven't found her, and don't know where she is now. Seeing the expectation in Qin Wanru's eyes, Shui Rulin didn't say her other conjecture in the end. A woman was separated from her husband and daughter in the war, and the possibility of her surviving was too small. But there was a little hope in Qin Wanru, and she didn't want to cut it off. Her words were extremely implicit. Is this seal mine? Qin Wanru tremblingly untied her neckline, took out the seal from inside, and eagerly wanted to get the proof from Shui Rulin. Shui Rulin looked at her seal, and helplessly shook her head to Qin Wanru, who was longing for it, and said, I don't know this seal, and I have never seen it before. But the Fenghua glazed cup seems to be related to you. That night when Madame D asked your grandmother to take out the Fenghua glazed cup, your grandmother sighed to me and said that Madame D was too greedy and that the cup was originally yours. So the Fenghua glazed cup is also mine? Qin Wanru really didn't expect this, because Chu Luqian asked her for it at that time. Yes, it is yours. Maybe you can find a way to ask about the Fenghua glazed cup. Shui Rulin thought for a while and said, it is also possible to find some people and things from it. As for other things, your grandmother said that she is not very clear. Shui Rulin really didn't know what happened at that time. It happened to be the period when Shui Rulin got married, and when she came back, Qin Wanru was already there. She didn't even know whether Qin Wanru was Qin Huayong's biological daughter. The explanation given by old grandma was that Qin Wanru had been raised outside the mansion, and she was brought back recently. As for other things, old grandma didn't let her ask more. After coming out of Shui Rulin's room, Qin Wanru didn't go back to her own room. She told old grandma the excuse of going to see the purple bamboo forest in the temple, and then walked out of the courtyard with Yujia. Not long after she left, Qi Rongji also found a similar excuse and followed her out of the courtyard with Chun Yi. As for Chun Shi, she quietly went down the mountain. Did Imperial grandmother see it? Chu Luqian said casually, and walked slowly to the path. This time, he didn't use a wheelchair. Yes, I have seen it, but I'm afraid that she doesn't like it very much. Xiao Xuanzi peeped at Chu Liuqian's face and said cautiously. She doesn't like it very much. Then let Imperial grandmother like it more. Chu Luqian said casually, as if what he said was just like the weather. His handsome eyes were slightly raised with a little teenager's sloppiness. Child, what do you mean? Xiao Xuanzi said cleverly. This king means that it's not interesting. Chu Liuqian's handsome smile was so bright that two misses passing by couldn't help but stop and look at him passing by, feeling shy. Child, you mean? Xiao Xuanzi didn't understand for a moment, and subconsciously glanced at the two misses on the roadside. Chapter 238. Two ferocious guards appeared out of nowhere and each of them dragged the two dainty young ladies out of the room. The servant girls screamed in fear and chased after them. Qin Wanru suddenly saw this scene and actually wanted to avoid it. However, Prince Chen's eyes had turned to her, so she could only walk over and bow sideways. Child, what a coincidence. Qin Wanru raised her head and quietly looked at Chu Liuchen's face. Unfortunately, I'm waiting for you. Chu Liuchen spread his robe and naturally walked a few steps forward. Seeing that Qin Wanru was stunned and didn't follow him, his handsome face showed some displeasure. Come over here. After saying that, he continued to walk forward. Qin Wanru had no choice but to follow him. Fortunately, this prince didn't walk fast. Qin Wanru was thin and had short legs, so she could keep up with him. Have you grown taller? Chu Liuchen suddenly stopped and waited for Qin Wanru to stand beside him. He used his hand to measure the top of Qin Wanru's head, and then compared it with his own height. His long and narrow beautiful eyes were filled with an unfathomable smile. You've grown shorter. Qin Wanru raised her head and looked at Chu Liuchen. She hadn't seen him for a long time. Surprisingly, Prince Qin had grown a lot taller. The gap between them didn't narrow, but widened, which made Qin Wanru feel a little frustrated. She stepped back and stood a little further away from Chu Liuchen. She said seriously, Child, I've grown taller. Grown taller? Why are you so short? Chu Liuchen slightly tilted his head and gestured in front of Qin Wanru to show the gap between the two of them. He seemed to be a little puzzled. His expression and action made Qin Wanru blush. She stared at Chu Liuchen with a little anger and asked, Where are you going, child? She simply didn't want to talk about height with him. It would hurt their relationship. Looking at the purple bamboo forest, Chu Liuchen put down his hand in a good mood, turned his head and walked forward with his hands behind his back. Child, are you also going to the purple bamboo forest? Qin Wanru said in surprise. It was an accident to meet Chu Liuchen here, and it was even more unexpected that they were going to the same place. But can't I go? Chu Liuchen asked with interest. Prince can certainly go, but... Qin Wanru hesitated, wondering if she could find an excuse to go back now. But what? Chu Liuchen said lazily. His eyes looked as gentle as jade, and his actions became more leisurely. His behavior was more like a cool breeze and bright moon. But inexplicably, Qin Wanru felt that if she told the truth, she might not even know how she would die. She immediately smiled knowingly and said, I'm afraid that I'll disturb the prince's quiet and elegant mood. I have indeed disturbed you. Chu Liuchen nodded and smiled. His immortal-like temperament immediately became a little enchanting and irritating. Qin Wanru suddenly wanted to stop and turn around willfully. Could they still talk properly and enjoy the scenery? Not everyone can see the purple bamboo forest of Huaguang Temple. Chu Liuchen raised his eyebrows and smiled as if he didn't see the vivid anger on Qin Wanru's face. At this time, he looked like a beautiful young man falling from the clouds. He was handsome and elegant, and even the smile on his face showed the gentleness and handsomeness from his bones. Why can't I see it? Isn't it said that the purple bamboo forest of Huaguang Temple is very famous? Since I can't see it, how can anyone know? I'm also very famous, but there shouldn't be many people who have seen me, right? Qin Wanru said lazily. These words made Qin Wanru speechless for a while. In the world, only Prince Qin was known to be an emperor. It was true that the throne of the deposed crown prince was taken away by the current emperor. The meaning of this was enough to make many people's imagination soar. As for whether it was true or not, it didn't matter. Most people felt that Prince Qin had a bad life. Otherwise, the whole world would be his. Qin Wanru secretly complained. She really couldn't answer these words. She raised her head and saw that Chu Liuchen was actually waiting for her to reply. She smiled twice and said, Huh. Wasn't it just haha? How could she, a weak girl, dare to participate in this kind of thing? In the purple bamboo forest of Huaguang Temple, there are tablet inscriptions left by the sages. Because there are many of them, it is also called the predecessor tablet forest. If you want to walk around the periphery of the purple bamboo forest, you can. But if you want to go to the inside of the purple bamboo forest and see the predecessor tablet forest, you can only enter with the permission of the abbot of Huaguang Temple. Chu Liuchen looked at her ambiguously. This time, he didn't embarrass her, but said slowly, Then I'll walk around on the side. Qin Wanru said knowingly. On the one hand, of course, She didn't have such a big face to let the abbot of Huaguang Temple think highly of her and let her enter the purple bamboo forest. On the other hand, of course, it was because Qin Wanru actually didn't want to accompany Prince Qin to walk around at all. After just a few steps, the prince's face was not very good again. There was a weak flush on his face. Although it reflected his delicate eyebrows and eyes as if they were dyed with bright colors, which made people unable to move their eyes, it also showed his weakness. I want to go inside and have a look. I have already talked with the abbot. Chu Liuchen's voice was lazy and gentle. If people who were not familiar with him, they would really think that he, the sick and weak Prince Qin, was such a harmless and gentle handsome young man. Prince, this time I am accompanying my grandmother and mother to go up the mountain. Qin Wanru reluctantly bit her cherry lips and hinted. She would not be confused by Chu Liuchen's bright and harmless appearance. Your grandmother and mother are both adults. Do you still need to take care of them? Chu Liuchen glanced at Qin Wanru with displeasure. Do you not want to accompany me to walk around? These words were different from the gentleness just now. There was coldness and majesty that Qin Wanru couldn't ignore. How come? Prince, you think too much. Qin Wanru rubbed her handkerchief and hurriedly stopped her thoughts. Qin Wanru, do you have a pet name? Chu Liuchen changed the topic too fast. Qin Wanru couldn't respond for a moment. She opened her bright watery eyes in surprise and asked in astonishment, What? Pet name? Do you have any pet name? Chu Liuchen said with a smile. It seemed that he was in a good mood again. I have one, but it's not very pleasant. Only my grandmother calls me by it. Qin Wanru hesitated for a moment, but still felt it was better to be sensible and tell the truth. What's your name? Chu Liuchen asked curiously. Zhuozhua. Qin Wanru answered helplessly. Her pink cheeks were slightly flushed, and she looked more delicate and smart. Zhuozhua? Good, you deserve the name Zhuozhua. Chu Liuchen laughed, and there was some meaning on his peerless face. Then I will call you Zhuozhua from now on. Prince, this is what my grandmother calls me. Qin Wanru unconsciously raised her voice and said unhappily. Zhuozhua, you don't like it? Chu Liuchen suddenly stopped and tilted his head to look at Qin Wanru. His pair of handsome eyes were hooked and looked around. Even though Qin Wanru knew that his color was just a layer of his protective color, and it changed from time to time, she was still confused by him for a moment. She hurriedly lowered her head and dared not to look at his extremely handsome face. Was it really good for a man to be more beautiful than a woman? Prince, I'm afraid that when I'm taken out by the guards, Yu Jie can only chase after me. Qin Wanru calmed herself down and tried to show her seriousness. Taken out by the guards? Ha! Chu Liuchen laughed and stretched out his hand to pat on Qin Wanru's shoulder for a few times. His behavior was natural and free, with a little romantic sense that had not been seen in the past. Zhuozhua, you're getting more and more interesting. Don't worry, you and I are in the same bathtub, so of course I won't be taken out. But other things? Speaking of this, Chu Liuchen gradually stopped smiling, but Qin Wanru was shocked. Inexplicably, she thought of Qin Huaiyong, and her forehead began to sweat. As expected, the next moment, Chu Liuchen's face became a little cold. I heard that Ningyuan Army General likes third young Master Wen, and my people seem to have seen third young Master Wen in the temple before. This was not a question but a confirmation. Qin Wanru's back began to sweat. My father, Zhuozhua, if one day you find that Ningyuan Army General is not the person you imagined, what will you do? Chu Liuchen said meaningfully. Prince, you mean? Qin Wanru did not dare to play dumb. Chu Liuchen's eyes were fixed on her face, which made her feel that any expression would appear to be deliberate, so she could only follow his meaning and said, I don't mean anything. I heard that Ningyuan Army General is now the deputy commander of the Imperial Guards, so if there are any important affairs in the future, the people of the general's mansion should know something. Qin Wanru's heart was beating fast, and she lowered her head. Prince, please understand. My father's study is not a place where anyone can enter, especially those files, which are not for everyone to read. Zhuozhua, I heard that you actually used your sword in Ningyuan Army General's study. Why do you look like a weak woman? Ordinary? Chu Liuchen stretched out his hand, held Qin Wanru's hand, and picked up her slightly sweaty fingers one by one, and then held them in his palm. His long and wide sleeves fell down, and if one did not see it closely, one really could not see that their hands were holding each other's. "Don't fool me with the way you fool others, I will not be happy." This time, Chu Luchun didn't say, "this prince," but the meaning of his words shocked Qin Wanru more than saying, "this prince." His graceful eyebrows and eyes were picturesque, but they revealed coldness and hostility, which was bone-chilling. "Don't forget that you even owe your life to me. Prince, I will not fool you." Qin Wanru bit her lips, and knowingly showed her loyalty. "If Prince needs anything, I will go through water and tread on fire without hesitation." Since she had decided to follow this path, she naturally had to show her loyalty. Even if she had to bite the bullet, she had to show her loyalty. This golden coattail was chosen by herself, and now she could not afford to regret it. So, even if she had to kneel, she would walk down step by step. "Then I have one thing to ask Zhuozhuo to do for me, how about it?" Chu Liuchun's words were almost coaxing, and the smile on his face became as gentle as jade again. "What is it?" Chapter 239. Qi Rongji came out with Qin Wanru. She had heard that Qin Wanru went to the famous purple bamboo forest of Huaguang Temple. She came out a little farther and didn't see Qin Wanru along the way. But when she turned a corner and saw Qin Wanru standing on the road in front of her, she was immediately overjoyed and hurriedly hid behind a big tree beside her. Chun Yi also hurriedly hid with her. Qin Wanru was with a man. How could Qi Rongji not be excited by such a new discovery? This was what she saw. She wanted to hold Qin Wanru's weakness in her hand and control her. From her angle, she could only see Chu Liuchun's back. Even if she couldn't see his face, his tall and straight figure already made people feel that he must be handsome. Looking at his clothes, the big purple brocade robe was inexplicably a little ostentatious. Qi Rongji frowned. This man's momentum seemed not small. Was he a dignitary that Qin Wanru knew? The aura he exuded was not something that an ordinary person could possess. Even from such a long distance, one could still sense his extraordinary aura. This man seemed to be nobler than third young Master One. Qi Rongji could not help but feel her heart warming up. She bit her lip and had other thoughts in her mind. She reached out to straighten her clothes and wanted to go over. She wanted to get to know this man. With her means and appearance, she would definitely be more attractive to men than Qin Wanru, who was as small as a bean sprout. She made up her mind here and showed a trace of complacency on her face. When she wanted to turn out from behind the tree, she suddenly felt that her head was black and her body suddenly softened. Qin Wanru looked at everything in front of her in astonishment. When she wanted to speak, she suddenly felt that she jumped up like a cloud. She was so scared that she almost screamed. When she stood still, the nothingness under her feet was shaking. With a pale face, she looked back at Chu Luchun and found that his face was getting paler. She was so scared that she held his waist tightly and lowered her voice to beg, "Child, let's go down." She didn't think it was a good thing to climb up the tree at this time. The branches swayed, and she felt as if she was stepping on the clouds, or maybe it was not the clouds. Her whole heart had no place to focus. Qin Wanru had never experienced such a thing. Her beautiful watery eyes were full of panic and fear. She instinctively held Chu Luchun tightly like a frightened beast. Qin Wanru's courage was much greater than that of ordinary ladies, but it did not include enjoying the scenery in such a place where there was neither sky nor earth. In particular, the one holding her was Prince Qin, who was so sick that he couldn't even stand. Would he accidentally fall down because he couldn't hold her? Qin Wanru held Chu Liuchun's clothes tightly with her backhand. She didn't know that her face was even worse than Chu Liuchun's at this time. She was really panicked. Chu Liuchun's eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face. Seeing that she was flustered like a child and lacked the calmness and steadiness of the past, she looked more real. Chu Luchun laughed for a while. Although he did not make a sound, everyone could see that he was in a good mood. He loosened his hands that were holding Qin Wanru tightly and said lazily, "My hands are tired. You hold me tighter. If you fall down, you will bear the consequences." Qin Wanru felt that if her eyes could kill, she would have killed Chu Luchen 100 times. But at this time, she didn't dare to argue. This was not a place for arguing. If this bear prince really fell her down, she would die inexplicably. How unwilling she would be. Was this prince really the black-bellied and ruthless Prince Qin? Why did he look like a naughty child, more naughty than Xiao Yuanhao? Qin Wanru hugged Chu Liuchen's waist hard and almost stuck her whole body to him. The faint fragrance of a young girl filled Chu Liuchen's nostrils, which made his heart beat a little faster inexplicably. Suddenly, Chu Luchen frowned and became unhappy. He reached out to hold Qin Wanru and let her lean against the trunk of a big tree on the side. He became impatient. "Don't move, I feel uncomfortable." Prince, where do you feel uncomfortable? Let's go down." Qin Wanru put one hand on his arm and the other on the trunk, and said in a panic, "Don't talk nonsense and watch the show." Chu Luchen said unhappily and looked at Qin Wanru suspiciously. Just now, Qin Wanru was too close to him, which made his breath a little faster. This feeling made Chu Luchen, who had always been in control of everything in his hands, very uncomfortable, as if something had escaped from his control. So at this moment, his gloomy eyes fell on Qin Wanru, trying to find something different from her. Why did she disturb his heart just now? Was it that woman's fragrance? Qin Wanru gritted her teeth and tried to calm herself down. She looked down and looked down. She didn't know where Xiao Xuanzi and Yu Jie were hiding. Not far behind where she and Chu Luchen stood, Qi Rongji and Chun Yi were lying. Further away, a figure was walking slowly. Seeing this figure clearly, Qin Wanru looked at Chu Luchen in astonishment, but found that a pair of handsome and gloomy eyes were staring at her so close. His eyes were gloomy, and she knew it was not a good thing. "Prince, what's wrong with you?" Qin Wanru didn't dare to move, as if she had been stared at by a poisonous snake. She was afraid that she would accidentally provoke Prince Qin. At this time, the situation was not the same as before. If he was in a bad mood, she really didn't know what would happen. Chu Luchen snorted coldly and stared at her arrogantly, which made Qin Wanru feel puzzled. Just now, she didn't provoke him, right? Seeing Chu Liuchen's eyes fall down, Qin Wanru temporarily restrained her panic and looked down. The figure coming over was obviously Wen Shiqi. What did Chu Luchen want to do? Wen Shiqi came here with a servant to enjoy the scenery along the way. He should also come here because of the reputation of the purple bamboo forest. He didn't expect to find Qi Rongji and her servant fainting behind the big tree. After being stunned for a moment, he and his servant went to wake them up. It was a little far from where Qi Rongji fainted, so they couldn't hear clearly what they were talking about. After Qi Rongji woke up, she bowed to Wen Shiqi in a delicate manner. Then they seemed to talk about something congenial, and then they walked together in the direction of the purple bamboo forest. When they walked under the tree where they were hiding, Qin Wanru heard Qi Rongji saying something to Wen Shiqi in that overly delicate voice, which seemed to be particularly enthusiastic. Wen Shiqi's voice seemed a little cold and indifferent. Then they walked over and slowly disappeared from Qin Wanru's eyes. Withdrawing her gaze and moving her stiff figure, Qin Wanru looked at Chu Luchen and suggested cautiously, "Prince, can we go down now?" Although she was in good health and had climbed up walls and trees before, she had never been so flustered. "You want to go down?" Chu Luchen asked with a cold and handsome face. "Yes, since third young master Wen has saved the beauty, can we go down now?" Qin Wanru asked with a smile, her long eyelashes like small fans fluttering twice. She was a little flustered before, but now she finally connected what Chu Luchen had said. "Do you want to see third young master Wen marry this beauty?" Chu Luchen suddenly smiled evilly. "Let Wen Shiqi marry Qi Rongji?" Qin Wanru thought it was better to let Wen Shiqi not marry her. Qi Rongji's temperament was not a woman who was good at home and living. Of course, she couldn't say it directly. She didn't know if it was her intuition, but she felt that Prince Chen was inexplicably hostile to Wen Shiqi. What does it have to do with us? It should be something that the elders in third young master Wen's mansion should worry about. Qin Wanru looked at Chu Luchen with her clear watery eyes with a trace of confusion. Her expression somehow pleased Chu Luchen. He reached out and gestured to Qin Wanru, saying, "Come here, hold her." Qin Wanru didn't dare to push him away. She hurriedly reached out and hugged Chu Liuchen's waist. Her whole body was stiff and didn't dare to move. She only raised a pair of watery eyes and looked at Chu Liuchen with expectation. Her big eyes seemed to be able to speak and clearly reflected Chu Liuchen's face. Chu Liuchen reached out and held Qin Wanru in his arms with great satisfaction. He smelled a delicate fragrance like plum blossoms and orchids, which was very pleasant. "What fragrance did you apply?" Qin Wanru's reaction was a little slow at this time. She looked at Chu Liuchen in a daze and didn't understand what he meant for a moment. But she still shook her head bluntly and said, "I didn't apply any fragrance." "You didn't apply any?" Chu Liuchen moved forward and sniffed on Qin Wanru's pink cheeks again. The fragrance was even more refreshing. Now they were getting closer to each other. Qin Wanru tried her best to hide her head. She didn't understand what Chu Liuchen was smelling. She really didn't put on any perfume. Nanny Jing said that a girl at her age didn't need any perfume at all. "Zhuozhua, you are too weak." Chu Liuchen suddenly smiled maliciously and then loosened his hands. Qin Wanru was so scared that she reached out and hugged him tightly. Her head, which had moved backward before, also tightly leaned forward. The two of them fell from the tree. As soon as they stood firm, Chu Liuchen held the tree trunk and coughed violently. Qin Wanru had no choice but to pat his back to help him to calm down. This man was obviously in poor health, but he still wanted to learn martial arts. He didn't know whether his poor health could bear it or not. Chu Liuchen finally calmed down. Xiao Xuanzi came out of nowhere and reached out to hand a handkerchief to him. Chu Liuchen didn't take it. He raised his handsome face, which was flushed because of coughing, and looked at Qin Wanru. "Where is the handkerchief?" Qin Wanru looked at him in astonishment and looked at Xiao Xuanzi's hand, which immediately withdrew. She had no choice but to hand the handkerchief in her hand to him. Chu Liuchen took the handkerchief and wiped it on his lips. Then, in Qin Wanru's astonished eyes, he naturally put the handkerchief into his cuff. "Let's go and have a look at the stone tablet in the purple bamboo forest." Just now, third young master Wen and Qi Rongji also went there. "If we go there at this time, will we bump into them?" Qin Wanru thought for a while and asked. Chapter 240. Qin Wanru didn't expect that she would really run into Wen Shiqi and Qi Rongji. They didn't leave, but stood between a stone tablet and chatted enthusiastically. Taking a closer look, she found that it was Qi Rongji who was chatting enthusiastically. Wen Shiqi was only responsible for standing aside, smiling politely and nodding, and almost didn't say a word. After entering the purple bamboo forest, Chu Liuchen asked Qin Wanru to leave first. He had something to do and left. Therefore, Qin Wanru didn't feel embarrassed when she saw Wen Shiqi and Qi Rongji. Since she ran into them, she just wanted to take a look. Seeing Qin Wanru coming from behind them, Qi Rongji's face changed slightly. She looked behind her nervously and didn't find the figure of the man she saw just now. Inexplicably, she felt a little flustered. Something happened to her when she stared at Qin Wanru and the man. Fortunately, she met Wen Shiqi. Otherwise, she didn't know what would have happened. Thinking of this, she looked at Qin Wanru with more vigilance. Qin Wanru came over and bowed to Wen Shiqi. Then she smiled slightly and was about to walk, but was stopped by Wen Shiqi gently. "Second Miss Qin, are you also here to see these inscriptions? I heard that these inscriptions in Huaguang Temple are the most famous, and there are some calligraphy treasures left by famous people and monks in the past. Since I'm here, I naturally want to have a look." Qin Wanru smiled slightly and said very politely. Huaguang Temple had a long history, and some inscriptions had been left for a long time. Even after going through wars, some inscriptions were still preserved. Although they were a little damaged, the inscription in front of her was actually a lot damaged, and even the following inscription was not left. No one knew who wrote it. It was an inscription, but most of it couldn't be seen clearly. Only a few words looked very vigorous, which made people have to be amazed at first glance. "I heard that this inscription was written by Master Qin 600 years ago," Wen Shiqi said with a gentle smile. Hearing what he said, it was inconvenient for Qin Wanru to leave. She stood still and looked at the inscription. The reason why Master Qin was called Master 600 years ago was because of his calligraphy. In her last life, Qin Wanru had seen an authentic work of Master Qin in Wen Shiqi's study, so she knew that he admired Master Qin's calligraphy very much. I actually don't have a deep understanding of this. Qin Wanru shook her head. Yes, Sister Wanru loves to play with them. She doesn't like calligraphy or anything like that. Qi Rongji squeezed between the two of them with jealousy and hatred in her eyes and happened to stand in front of Qin Wanru. He meant that Qin Wanru was very vulgar and would not understand these elegant behaviors. Qin Wanru took a step back and didn't argue with Qi Rongji. She bowed sideways to Wen Shiqi and said, "Third young Master Wen, I'll go ahead and have a look." "Second Miss, please go ahead," Wen Shiqi said with a smile, but his deep eyes were full of doubt. Does this second Miss Qin really have no feelings for me? Or did the Qin clan really not have any thoughts about him? Seeing Qin Wanru leave, Qi Rongji was overjoyed. But when she saw Wen Shiqi's thoughtful eyes fall on Qin Wanru, she became more and more jealous. But she also knew that she could not say too much at this time, so she could only smile and say, "Third young Master Wen, can you tell me about this Master Qin? I've only seen the introduction of this Master Qin in the past, but I don't know the details." "Actually, I don't know much either." Wen Shiqi's eyes fell on Qi Rongji's face and he smiled slightly. "Third young Master Wen, you must know more than I do. Please explain. Please explain." Qi Rongji smiled coquettishly. Because of Wen Shiqi's gaze, her face turned pink and her appearance became more and more delicate. Qi Rongji was very confident about her appearance. "In this case, I'll tell you something I know." Wen Shiqi's voice came slowly from behind and finally disappeared. At this time, Qin Wanru was far away from them. She was very grateful to Wen Shiqi and wanted to pull him out of the tragedy of the last life. From the previous conversation between Wen Shiqi and her, she knew that he must have suspected this matter, so he didn't mention anything about his cousin sister and his second brother. He only asked her why she knew about it. It could be seen that he already knew some facts. In this case, with Wen Shiqi's intelligence, it was impossible for him to be plotted against by those two people. Qin Wanru had already wiped away the blindness of family affection for him, so she didn't need to worry too much about it. Even though Wen Shiqi was sick in the last life, he still gave her the impression that he was extraordinarily intelligent. If he hadn't been sick, he would have had a place in those turbulent events in the last life. In this life, this was the only thing she could do. Moreover, Wen Shiqi still suspected her, so there was no need for her to have more contact with Wen Shiqi now. This was to prevent other accidents from happening. This was Qin Wanru's plan. That was why she turned around and left when Qi Rongji spoke. The purple bamboo forest was very large, and the stone tablets were scattered in the middle of the purple bamboo forest. The outermost part of the purple bamboo forest was surrounded by a wall, and the stone tablets were all inside the wall. The purple bamboo forest surrounded by the wall was very large. Qin Wanru had not walked out of the forest since she came here. The inner courtyard of the purple bamboo forest was very large, but there were very few people. Along the way, she only saw Wen Shiqi and Qi Rongji at the beginning. Qi Rongji could enter this forest because of Wen Shiqi, and Qin Wanru was brought here by Chu Luchen. Otherwise, she couldn't even enter the gate. The wind blew through the layers of bamboo leaves, and the purple bamboo patterns looked a little more simple and elegant behind the green leaves. After walking for a while, Qin Wanru left with Yu Jie before they reached the edge. When she came out, she didn't meet Wen Shiqi and Qi Rongji. She didn't know whether they went back or continued to walk in. The mountain roads were crisscrossed, and there was more than one way in and out, so it was normal not to meet them. On the way back, when she returned to her room, Qin Wanru was very tired. After washing up, she sat in front of the window and let Yu Jie wring her hair for her. She closed her eyes and rested in the chair lazily. After sitting for a while, she felt very quiet. When she looked up and saw that Yu Jie wanted to say something, she couldn't help but smile. "Do you have anything to say?" "Miss, Prince Qin is very dangerous," Yu Jie said uneasily when Qin Wanru asked. "I know, don't talk about him." Qin Wanru nodded and closed her eyes, not wanting to continue this topic. How could a person like Chu Luchen not be dangerous? "What about Miss Qi?" Yu Jie was a little anxious. As a servant girl, She couldn't say anything about Prince Chen, but Qi Rongji obviously had bad intentions. Just let her make trouble. Qin Wanru slightly raised the corner of her mouth and smiled indifferently. She should have sent one of her servant girls away, right? She was almost treated as a useless chess piece. Qi Rongji will not let it go. Is it Madame of Duke Xing and Madame D who join hands to frame you and Madame Dowager? Madame D's excuse is reasonable, but why does Madame of Duke Xing have to deal with you and Madame Dowager? Yu Jie asked in confusion. She had dried the handkerchief in her hand, and now she was combing Qin Wanru's slender hair with a comb. Her hair was thick, black, and soft. It made her face, which had no makeup on, look even more delicate and beautiful. Madame of Duke Xing, maybe she has a reason to deal with me. Qin Wanru's long eyelashes fluttered, and she slightly rolled her watery eyes, with her smile gradually turning cold. The hatred between her and Duke Xing's mansion was destined from the last life. Therefore, after entering the capital city, she had been careful, for fear that she would accidentally step into Madame of Duke Xing's trap. She had thought that with the previous plot, Madame of Duke Xing and Madame D would not hook up so quickly. Unexpectedly, she was wrong. Even in such a messy situation in Qin's mansion, Madame of Duke Xing could still manipulate Madame D and let her use Qi Rongji as a bait to deal with her. Madame of Duke Xing took out a plate before, and her purpose was also Qin Wanru, but she didn't know how she ruled out Qin Yuru. Even if the seal was related to Duke Xing's mansion, when the seal appeared on the clothes, there were 3 people. Why did Madame of Duke Xing believe that it was her? There must be one thing that she overlooked. What made her neglect it? Madame of Duke Xing immediately distinguished the difference between her and Qin Yuru. She wanted to deal with her, not Qin Yuru. What was the basis? Her beautiful eyebrows couldn't help but frown slightly. This was what she couldn't figure out now. Miss, why does Madame of Duke Xing want to deal with you? There is no grudge between you and her. Even if she wanted to deal with Master Hao before, you saved Master Hao and ruined her plan. She can't keep going against you, can she? Yu Jie said angrily in confusion. The people around Qin Wanru had already seen that Madame of Duke Xing wanted to deal with Qin Wanru. Right? Why does she keep targeting me instead of Qin Yuru? Qin Wanru also couldn't figure it out and couldn't help muttering to herself. Who knows what she is thinking? If she wants to deal with people from General's mansion, First Miss should be the one to deal with. Is it because Madame of Duke Xing bullies the weak and fears the strong and dares not to bully First Miss, so she keeps plotting against Second Miss? Yu Jie thought for a while and said. A trace of coldness flashed in Qin Wanru's eyes. Madame of Duke Xing wanted to deal with her but not Qin Yuru. Of course, it was not because she bullies the weak and fears the strong. Ningyuan Army General's mansion might be regarded as a new noble, but its rank was not high and its foundation was not enough to compete with Duke Xing's mansion. If Madame of Duke Xing wanted to deal with someone, she would not consider this reason. Madame of Duke Xing wanted to deal with her and set her mind on her. She must have investigated her and Qin Yuru. There was one thing that was absolutely different between her and Qin Yuru. Moreover, she could tell at a glance that Qin Yuru was not the one she wanted to deal with. Then why did she set her mind on it? If she couldn't cut through the fog in front of her, she couldn't find the key point. For a moment, when facing Madame of Duke Xing, she seemed to be much more passive. However, Madame of Duke Xing stretched out one foot first, so she stepped on her foot first and then made plans. Chapter 241. In the afternoon of the next day, Madame Dowager left Huaguang Temple with a group of people and returned to Ningyuan Army General's mansion. It was very quiet at the gate of General's mansion, and there were no onlookers. But there were still people pointing at them from farther away, and they seemed to be discussing something. As soon as Qin Wanru got off the carriage, she saw Madame D and Qin Huayong standing beside Madame Dowager. Both of them looked terrible. She stepped forward and saluted them calmly, and then retreated to the side. Zhuozhuo, go back first. Rilin, come with me. Madame Dowager said with a serious face. It was obvious that Qin Huayong and Madame D had told her something before, and they didn't want Qin Wanru to be involved in it, so they sent Qin Wanru away first. Qin Wanru nodded and turned to leave. Suddenly, she turned to Qin Huayong and said, Father, how about the plate? It is a royal gift. If something happens to it, it will be troublesome. Qin Huaiyong's eyebrows jumped slightly, and he nodded casually with a smile on his face. His voice was also a little gentle. I have my own plan for it. Don't worry. Madame D's face immediately became terrible, and even a little flustered. She glanced at Qin Wanru coldly, but she didn't say anything sensibly. In fact, this matter was not completely over. At this time, she and Madame of Duke Xing were both happy. However, she had wanted to find a chance to explain to Qin Huaiyong. Unexpectedly, Qin Wanru suddenly revealed it at this time, which caught her off guard. Qi Rongji was also observing Madame D. She almost couldn't control the hatred in her eyes, but she still gritted her teeth and turned to leave with Qin Wanru. After walking for a while, Qi Rongji looked back and couldn't see Madame Dowager and others behind her. She took a few steps and stopped Qin Wanru. Sister Wanru, wait for me. I have a few words with you. Qin Wanru stood still and waited for her to come over. She asked indifferently, What's the matter? Sister Wanru, I'm sorry. I misunderstood you before. It must be Qin Yuru and Madame D who did it on purpose. I'm here to apologize to you. Qi Rongji bowed deeply to Qin Wanru and looked to apologize sincerely. It doesn't matter. Qin Wanru said lightly and turned to leave. Qi Rongji didn't expect that her sincerity would be rewarded with such a frivolous reply. She almost couldn't keep the smile on her face, but she immediately said, Sister Wanru, I know you don't like third young master one, and I'm short-sighted. But both of us are hurt by Qin Yuru and Madame D. Are you willing to accept it? So what? Qin Wanru narrowed her eyes and said indifferently, You are the second miss of the general's mansion and you are no worse than Qin Yuru. But she and Madame D can't tolerate you. They were like this when you were in Jiangzhou and they are still like this when you are in the capital city. How can you survive in the future? Even your marriage in the future will be in their hands. That is a matter of life. Qi Rongji said earnestly. She was very considerate of Qin Wanru. So, what should I do? Qin Wanru smiled, and her long eyelashes fluttered a few times, hiding a trace of coldness at the bottom of her eyes. Sister Wanru, I am also unwilling to accept it. Let's join hands. Qi Rongji's voice was very low, but it became more and more sincere. She gritted her teeth and said with hatred, I am unwilling to accept it. I almost lost my life, and even if I die, I can't find the culprit. How can I accept it? I have checked last night. Someone did something to my carriage, and one of the wheels is broken. If I hit it deliberately, there is a big possibility that something bad will happen. Qin Wanru was not surprised by this result. Since Madame D wanted something bad to happen to Qi Rongji, this was the best way. First, they made a mark on the wheel, and then when they went down the slope, they hit a big tree, the carriage fell apart, and then the horse crashed. In fact, it was not a difficult thing. I don't know what to do. You just be careful in the future. Qin Wanru said lightly. Someone is about to die, how can I be careful? Qin Wanru, you can't be so useless. Qi Rongji could not pretend anymore and said angrily. What else can I do? This is the capital city, not Jiangzhou. Qin Wanru looked at Qi Rongji coldly and reminded her, in Jiangzhou, you may be able to rely on your father to fight against my father, but not here. She looked Qi Rongji up and down with some contempt in her eyes. Here, you can rely on no one. If you only rely on yourself, what can you do to Big Sister? If you can't even deal with Big Sister, how can you deal with Madame D? Qi Rongji, I advise you not to go out in the future and don't stay alone. Maybe something bad will really happen. I am not worried about you, but I am afraid that if something bad happens, you will blame it on me. Qin Yuru is good at this kind of thing. After saying this, Qin Wanru did not wait for Qi Rongji to say anything and turned to leave. Qin Wanru. Qi Rongji's exasperated voice came from behind. Qin Wanru did not look back, and just walked away with Yu Jia. Qi Rongji was so angry that her face turned blue. She kicked hard on the tree trunk beside her, gritted her teeth, and said with hatred, Useless bitch, no wonder you have been bullied by Qin Yuru, you deserve to be bullied. Miss, we are now staying in General's mansion. If you really want to deal with us, I am afraid you really can't. Chun-Yi cautiously reminded her. She felt that what Qin Wanru said before was right. In this case, it was really not easy to directly deal with Qin Yuru and her daughter. No backing? Don't I still have my brother? My brother is Qin Yuru's weakness. Qin Yuru has a bad reputation now, so let's make it worse for her. Let's see if she still dares to plot against me. Qi Rongji had long been provoked by Qin Wanru. At this time, she felt that even her servant girl looked down on her. She was so angry that she turned back and gave Chun-Yi a slap and scolded. Yes, whatever Miss says is right. Chun-Yi covered her face and knelt down with a plop. Let's go back and see what my brother has to say. If he still covers up for this bitch, I will break off the brother-sister relationship with him, Qi Rongji said fiercely. She had already asked Xuanxi to bring her letter to Qi Tianyu, and that was to tell him about this matter, so that he could find a way to help her deal with Qin Yuru. At this point, she did not believe that her brother would still believe what Qin Yuru said. The matter between Qin Yuru and Di Yen had just ended. When the whole capital city was talking about this matter, some old stories about Qin Yuru began to spread out, talking about some things in Jiangzhou. It was said that when first Miss Qin was in Jiangzhou, she and Qi Tianyu, the son of the magistrate of the prefecture at that time, were in love. They were childhood sweethearts, and the two families had already formed an alliance. She promised Qi Tianyu to get married before he went to the capital city for the Imperial examination. Unexpectedly, Madame Di and Qin Yuru climbed up the high branch of Duke Yong's mansion and wanted to break off the engagement with Qi Tianyu. Moreover, they used second Miss Qin, who was not sensible, as a shield. For a time, this matter was in chaos in Jiangzhou, and it could be regarded as the biggest scandal in Jiangzhou. No one knew where this news came from, and it became more and more popular. It was said that some businessmen who transferred from Jiangzhou to the capital city to do business also talked about this matter, which made this matter more and more vivid. This matter, which had just faded a little before, immediately became a storm in the city because of this matter. Not only ordinary people in the capital city were talking about this matter, but also some aristocratic families were talking about this matter. Qin Wanru looked like a child. Although she was delicate, she was childish. No one would think that she really liked Qi Tianyu. Such a little child, what did she know? She was framed by Qin Yuru and her daughter. It was so hateful. Even a vicious stepmother was nothing more than this. As this news came out, another speculation came out silently. It was said that the reason why Madame Di and Qin Yuru framed Qin Wanru was that she was not Qin Huayong's biological daughter, but picked up in the chaos of war. Although the rebellion had passed many years ago, many people still remembered it. Some of the past family affairs of Ningyuan army general's mansion were dug out. As it was dug out, the Yamen also caught an escaped slave. It was said that when he entered the capital city, he escaped from the team of Ningyuan army general's mansion. After being caught, he kept saying that it was Madame Di who asked him to do it. The purpose was to kidnap second Miss Qin and sell her to that dirty place. The words of this escaped slave immediately stirred up the whole capital city. For the sake of the whole capital city, it was dug out that Shui Rulin married into Qin's mansion. On the one hand, she was plotted against by Madame Di. On the other hand, she wanted to take care of Qin Wanru, who had no parents. This was no longer just a rumor. It was simply appalling and unbelievable. But at this time, young Madame of Duke Yangxiu said that she was also in Jiangzhou at that time. She said that she was indeed there when this happened. So many news came one after another, like thunder in summer over the sky of Qin's mansion. The atmosphere in the whole sky was unprecedentedly tense. Qin Huayong and old grandma closed the door and discussed for a long time. They could not make up their minds. Finally, they put Madame Di under house arrest and directly sent old maids to guard Yulon Pavilion where Madame Di lived. Not to mention Madame Di, even other people in the yard were not allowed to go in and out at will. They directly separated Madame Di. Qin Yuru was also grounded and copied the rules for women in her yard. The matter of Qin's mansion was related to the inner court. Recently, all the people of Qin's mansion did not appear in front of the public. Even if there were curious people who wanted to ask, they could not. But Qi Tianyu was different. As the person involved, it was much more convenient to ask him. So some curious people went to ask Qi Tianyu if it was true. However, those who asked Qi Tianyu did not get a confirmed answer. Qi Tianyu always talked about other things. When it was really inevitable, he just said that the people of Qin's mansion had a good character. As for other things, he did not know. At this point, he still wholeheartedly defended the reputation of Qin's mansion. Everyone had a good opinion of this young Master Qi. Chapter 242. First Miss and Mei Shui really left from the back door. I don't know where they went at this time. Yu Jie was sent by Qin Wanru to keep an eye on Qin Yuru. Seeing Qin Yuru also dressed like a servant girl and secretly left Qin's mansion, she hurried to report to Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru was reading the medical book given by Mingqiu Nun. It was very quiet in the room. Hearing Yu Jie's words, she raised her head and shook it. Don't worry about her. It must be Qi Tianyu at this time. As she said, she slowly picked up the small scissors on one side and cut the jumping candle. A long section of the candle was cut off, and the unstable flame immediately calmed down. She went to ask the first young master of the Qi family to prove that what happened before was a lie. Miss, what should we do? The first young master of the Qi family will definitely help First Miss. Yu Jie was anxious when she heard it. She knew the influence of First Miss on the first young master of the Qi family. Qi Tianyu won't help her. Qin Wanru smiled. Her beautiful hair had been combed again. She took off the two buns and only made a braid, hanging it on one side, which made her look more charming and beautiful. Why not? Before Qin Yu. Just tell me that when we were in Jiangzhou, the first young master of the Qi family once made trouble for Second Miss in order to help First Miss. Yu Jie said. Qin Wanru squinted her watery eyes and looked at the candle on the candlestick. A faint smile appeared on her beautiful lips. Today is different from the past. It was caused by Qi Tianyu. How could he slap his own face? It was caused by the first young master of the Qi family? Yu Jie was startled. The whole mansion seemed to be in a mess in the past 2 days, and the atmosphere in the mansion was also very depressed. Everyone knew that this kind of thing was so systematic that it would not be solved easily. However, people in the mansion guessed that the cause of this matter was related to Shui Rulin and Qin Wanru. Unexpectedly, it was caused by Qi Tianyu. Qi Rongji suffered such a big loss. How could she be willing to give up? She must seek help from Qi Tianyu. Qin Wanru said slowly. Doesn't the first young master of the Qi family believe in First Miss's words the most? Yu Jie was puzzled. She actually didn't know much about what had happened back then. She only knew most of it from Qinyue. Times have changed. If Qi Tianyu still can't figure it out at this time, he is really stupid. Qin Wanru's smile gradually became cold. She never thought that Qi Tianyu was stupid, otherwise he would not have been the third in the examination. She even thought that Qi Tianyu was not as affectionate as he showed. Some of the things that came out this time were expected, and some were unexpected, but the result was good. The rumor was spread by someone sent by Qi Tianyu, but Qin Wanru asked Chu Luqin to release the coachman. As for asking the coachman to tell the truth, it was not difficult for Chu Luqin at all. The young madam of Duke Yangxu's righteous words surprised Qin Wanru a little. Qin Wanru thought that even if the young madam of Duke Yangxu's 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 young madam of Duke, of course, the effect was better at this time, but it was easy to bring the young madam of Duke Yangxu to the teeth of the storm. Qin Wanru was very grateful for the reaction of the young madam of Duke Yangxu. Originally, she wanted to release the coachman after the young madam of Duke Yangxu had a look at him at a specific moment. But now it was a better opportunity. After pushing forward step by step, she could spread the things in Jiangzhou at that time and confirm part of it. For some rumors, because one part of it was verified, it made people believe in the other parts without a doubt. Qin Wanru had this effect long ago. At that time, there were many families of businessmen who traveled in Jingxin Monastery. In the past, no one talked about it, so these people naturally didn't dare to talk about it. But now since everyone was talking about it, these people also became witnesses. What they saw and heard would no longer be concealed. Naturally, the more people talked about this rumor, the more they felt it was true. If the first young master of the Qi family doesn't intervene, what about Duke Yong's mansion? Yu Jie was relieved, but suddenly thought of Duke Yong's mansion and said, Qin Wanru didn't speak this time. She smiled slightly and meaningfully. Duke Yong's mansion couldn't do anything. Duke Yong arrived at Ningyuan Army General's mansion the next day. After Qin Huayong welcomed him into the study, they sat down according to the host and the guest. As soon as he sat down, Duke Yong's face turned cold. He slammed his hand on the table and said to Qin Huayong with a gloomy face, Brother-in-law, what do you mean by locking my sister up? Do you want to favor your concubine to the detriment of your wife? Qin Huayong was given the title of favor your concubine to the detriment of your wife. Qin Huayong had no foundation in the capital city. If he really got such a title, his career would probably be blocked. Brother-in-law, what do you mean? Qin Huayong said unhurriedly. What do you mean by locking my sister up? Do you think our Duke Yong's mansion is dead? How could you lock my sister up because of some hearsay? Duke Yong came here today to stand up for Madame D. He was very imposing. He didn't believe that Qin Huayong dared to really offend him. Brother-in-law, don't you know the rumors outside? Qin Huayong asked in a cold voice. He didn't like so many rumors outside, but since it happened, he must make the smallest sacrifice to calm the situation. The rumors outside must be spread by people in your mansion. You can check Madame Shui and your second daughter in your mansion. They must be jealous of my sister and Yuru, so they spread such rumors. Brother-in-law, I don't mean to criticize you, but how can you sweep the world if you don't sweep the house? You are a general in vain. Duke Yong sneered. It's not them. Qin Huayong said with certainty. Brother-in-law, you won't cover up for them, will you? If it's not them, who else can it be? Look at what they have done. Is it human? If my sister is not good, will your mansion be good? Duke Yong's eyes were about to spurt fire. It's them who should be grounded. As long as you ground them, this matter will be peaceful. When the news came out, they were still in Huaguang Temple and didn't do anything. It's not them. They can't meddle in the matter of the coachman. They don't have such great ability, Qin Huayong said. It happened suddenly. Of course, he also suspected that Shui Rulin and Qin Wanru had done it. But after checking, he found that it had nothing to do with them. Qin Huayong, what do you mean now? Do you really want to imprison my sister for a lifetime? Duke Yong was unhappy and looked at Qin Huayong with sharp eyes. What else can I do except this? Do you still want Yuru to bear this matter? Qin Huayong turned a blind eye to the anger on Duke Yong's face and said coldly. Duke Yong was not the only one who was badly battered. Many things were caused by Madame D. How could he not be angry? At this time, he suppressed the anger in his heart and talked to Duke Yong. Until now, he didn't want to fall out with Duke Yong. It was not good for him or Duke Yong. Yuru is just a child. If she bears the responsibility... Duke Yong saw that he couldn't overwhelm Qin Huayong in terms of momentum, so he rolled his eyes and slowed down his voice. Before coming here, Countess Yong told him another possibility. Although he didn't agree with it, he also thought it was feasible at this time. No. Brother-in-law, you don't like Yuru? Before he finished his words, Qin Huayong's face had become fierce. He already knew what Duke Yong was going to say. Yuru is young after all. With my sister's help, she will be fine. Duke Yong hurriedly explained in a panic. Put the blame on Yuru, and then Di Yen will break the engagement with Yuru because of this. Brother-in-law, is this your idea? Qin Huayong smiled coldly. Although he didn't like Di Yen, he also knew that Di Yen was Qin Yuru's best choice at this time. On this point, his idea was the same as Madame D's. You? How can you think so? I also want to solve the current predicament. Duke Yong stammered. Then he straightened his chest and said loudly, trying to show his selflessness. In fact, this was Countess Yong's idea. Before coming here, they had discussed it. Countess Yong repeatedly said that with Qin Yuru's reputation, Marrying her would harm Di Yen. At this time, they should break the engagement in the chaos and marry a virtuous girl from a famous family for Di Yen, which could guide Di Yen to the right path instead of making his reputation worse. Duke Yong didn't agree at first because Di Yen was his sister and the sister he loved the most. However, Countess Yong kept talking about Di Yen's future, so he was a little persuaded. Although he didn't agree with Countess Yong at that time, he also said that he would act according to the circumstances. At this time, he changed his mind and had this idea, which became stronger and stronger. His son couldn't really be influenced by Qin Yuru. At that time, not only would he achieve nothing, but his reputation would be worse. The engagement is still valid, and it can't be broken. Qin Huaiyong said in an unquestionable tone. Brother-in-law, this marriage was originally appropriate. Yen grew up with Kai Xian, and they indeed had affection for each other for a long time. Yen originally wanted to marry Ning Kai Xian, but my mother insisted that Yen marry Yuru, so this matter was suppressed. However, Yen has always had Ning Kai Xian in his heart. This time, Ning Kai Xian was forced to die by Yuru. In fact, it is not impossible for them to be together by force. Brother-in-law, are you determined to break the engagement? Qin Huaiyong's face became more and more gloomy. This is also for their own good. We can't let them become a pair of resentful couple. In the future, they won't be happy. If Ning Kai Xian didn't die, maybe they could still be together. But now Ning Kai Xian is dead. The dead are the most important, and if she becomes the eternal white moonlight in Yan's heart, Yuru marrying him. I'm afraid, after the engagement is broken, we will still be relatives, and I will help Yuru find a better marriage in the future. Duke Yong said hypocritically, pretending to be considerate of Duke Yong's mansion. He used both the carrot and the stick, and he didn't believe that they could still break the engagement. They couldn't break the engagement. Chapter 243. Duke Yong's face changed dramatically as if he was facing a formidable enemy. Didn't he say that the problem had been solved? First brother-in-law, many servants have seen the plate bestowed by the emperor and heard a lot of words before. Until now, you haven't given me an explanation as to why the plate appeared in our mansion. It is said to be a betrothal gift, but it is not on the list of betrothal gifts, and there is a crack left a long time ago on the plate. There is a crack on the plate. Qin Huaiyong said word by word. His eyes were deep and sharp, and a gust of coldness came to his face. Even if it was really a misunderstanding, the cracked plate was already a crime. The emperor's gift was recorded, and it belonged to whoever it belonged to. What was more, Duke Xing's mansion was involved in it. Duke Yong dared not and could not afford to take the risk. Then what should we do now? Speaking of this, Duke Yong felt guilty and had to soften his tone, not daring to mention breaking off the engagement. Madame D caused the trouble, so she should be locked up. As for other things, Madame D is also the mastermind. Qin Huaiyong said in a low voice. When Madame D was locked up, he had already thought it through. The only way to minimize the loss was to put all the blame on Madame D. Suddenly, he remembered what Qin Wanru said to him before. It should be time to ask for a title for Shui Rulin. The rumor was not good for Madame D, but it was good for Shui Rulin. Now it was Shui Rulin who was in charge of the inner court, and he had promised Qin Wanru that he would ask for a title for Shui Rulin at the right time. Now it was the best opportunity, and he could also let people see that everyone in Qin's mansion was good except for Madame D. No, my sister is ruined. Even if Duke Yong was held hostage by Qin Huaiyong, he couldn't control his anger at this time. Madame D is just locked up. It is not ruined. Let's talk about it after this thing is over. There is still a chance to get out. Qin Huaiyong said lightly. How long will it be? Duke Yong said unhappily. Of course it's because there's no news about it. The sooner the better. Qin Huaiyong raised the corner of his mouth. Of course, he would not tell Duke Yong that he did not intend to release Madame D. Not only did he not intend to, but he also wanted to transfer Madame D's title to Shui Rulin. Compared with Shui Rulin, who was pregnant but still managed the family affairs, Qin Huaiyong really did not like Madame D, who almost implicated the whole Qin's mansion. Although he would not really hurt Madame D for the sake of Qin Yuru, he did not intend to let this matter go. When will there be no news? Now that this matter has become the talk of the town, not only will there be rumors about it, but it will also spread to you. Are you really not worried at all? Duke Yong said with a sullen face. He was anxious, very anxious, not for Qin Huaiyong, but for himself. Madame D was born in Duke Yong's mansion. Let's suppress this matter secretly. With two people working together, the results should be faster. Qin Huaiyong knew what Duke Yong was worried about, so he did not expose him. He comforted him and then added lightly, "What if we don't do this?" His words made Duke Yong speechless. In this situation, they could only try to suppress the rumors first. Otherwise, whatever they said would be wrong. Okay, let's do this. But don't forget that she is my sister. If she really has an accident, my mother will do anything. Duke Yong stood up, gritted his teeth, and threatened Qin Huaiyong, saying that if Qin Huaiyong really did harm to Madame D, Duke Yong would fight with him to the death. Rest assured, Yuru still has to marry into Duke Yong's mansion. Qin Huaiyong stood up to see him off. His words comforted Duke Yong. With a sullen face and a cold snort, he did not say anything, turned around and left. Today, he came to Ningyuan Army General's mansion without achieving any of his goals. Thinking of it, he felt very aggrieved. Qin Huaiyong stood in the hall and did not see him out. He just looked at his back with an ambiguous look. What happened next became more and more confusing. First, an Imperial censor accused Qin Huaiyong of not disciplining his wife strictly, saying that such a woman could not have the title of honorary lady. The Ministry of Justice had the testimony of the coachman, but it was a little troublesome to interrogate Madame D, so this matter was also presented. No matter what Madame D did, she was still a madam with the title of honorary lady. How could she be brought to court so casually? So this matter was related to Madame D's title of honorary lady. For a moment, everyone thought that Madame D should not be a madam with the title of honorary lady. At this time, Qin Huaiyong knelt at the gate of the palace and asked for the accusation of not disciplining his wife strictly. He also said that Madame D was not idle and should be stripped of the title of honorary lady. But Madame Shui, who wholeheartedly protected his second daughter, was a quiet and dignified woman and should receive the title of honorary lady. He asked the emperor to transfer Madame D's title of honorary lady to Madame Shui. It could be said that he had never seen or heard of such a thing before. Qin Huaiyong knelt at the gate of the palace. The emperor in the palace did not send a message for a long time, so he continued to kneel at the gate of the palace. This matter caused a sensation from the people to the palace and the whole court. Some people thought that even if Madame D did not have the title of honorary lady, she should not be given to Madame Shui. Madame Shui was only a secondary wife. How could she have a higher position than the legal wife? But some people thought it was reasonable. The female mistress of Ningyuan Army General's mansion should have the title of honorary lady. Otherwise, there was no way to convince the public. Since the legal wife could not be the legal wife, naturally the secondary wife should be. The secondary wife was also a wife. Outside the palace, Qin Huaiyong continued to kneel at the gate of the palace. He had been kneeling at the gate of the palace for 2 hours. Until now, no one came to ask him to go in. So he lowered his head and kept kneeling respectfully. Who is this? Why are you kneeling here? Did something happen? Suddenly, a voice as gentle as jade came into the silence, followed by the sound of wheels turning. Qin Huaiyong raised his eyes and looked excitedly at the handsome young man sitting in the wheelchair. Chu Luchen, who was facing the light, looked as elegant as jade. It could be said that he was floating like an immortal. Only the wheelchair seemed to pull him from the immortal state to the mortal world. Your Highness, this is Ningyuan Army General. He is asking for the title of honorary lady for his secondary wife. The little eunuch who was asked lowered his head and answered respectfully. Asking for the title of honorary lady for his secondary wife? What a loyal and affectionate man. If you really do such a thing for the people you care about, it is really a pity. Chu Liuchen's eyes fell on Qin Huaiyong's face and praised him lightly. Your Highness. Qin Huaiyong also calmed down at this time. He kowtowed to Chu Luchen respectfully on the ground and made a big bow. No need. Chu Luchen waved his hand casually and said, "Doesn't my uncle have time to see you?" "The emperor is busy. My business is trivial." Qin Huaiyong lowered his head and said, "Trivial? It's just a woman's business, right? Uncle is really busy with important things." After Chu Luchen finished speaking, he slightly raised the corner of his mouth and said gently. Xiao Xuanzi turned his wheelchair and continued to push Chu Luchen to other places. All this seemed to be just a chance encounter. But someone immediately reported it to the emperor. After a while, a eunuch ordered someone to call Qin Huaiyong in. Qin Wanru had guessed that Qin Huaiyong went to kneel at the palace gate. Seeing that Qin Huaiyong was not back when he was supposed to return to the mansion, Madame Dowager and Shui Rulin were anxious and sent people to wait at the Chuehua gate, including Qin Wanru. But they waited until the afternoon. Because Qin Huaiyong did not come back, all the masters in the mansion were not in the mood for lunch and were all anxious. Shui Rulin then went to Madame Dowager's place. After knowing the news, Qin Wanru also went to Madame Dowager's Xining Pavilion to talk with them. But when they said the funny things in the past, Madame Dowager just forced a smile and Shui Rulin was even more listless. Finally, an old maid came to report that Qin Huaiyong was back, and the room immediately became lively and joyful. When Qin Huaiyong strode in, Madame Dowager's eyes fell on him excitedly. Finding that he was fine except for a pale face, she breathed a sigh of relief and sat down again. Shui Rulin hurriedly asked someone to make Qin Huaiyong's favorite tea. She wanted to help Qin Huaiyong regardless of her big belly, but was stopped by Qin Huaiyong. He helped her sit down in a chair on the side and then bowed to Madame Dowager. "Sit down. Are you all right?" Madame Dowager asked Qin Huaiyong to sit down and said anxiously. She was really worried that Qin Huaiyong was the only backbone in this family full of women. If something really happened to him, the whole Qin's mansion would be finished. Qin Huaiyong sat down in a chair, picked up the teacup served by a servant girl and took a sip. After a while, he smiled to Madame Dowager and said, "Mother, I'm fine." "How could you be so bold? Didn't I tell you before that this matter was not urgent? If something really happened to you, what would Rulin, Zhuozhua and I do?" Madame Dowager also calmed down a little at this time and blamed him. "Mother, our Ningyuan Army General's mansion also needs a madam to entertain," Qin Huaiyong said calmly. There was no hope for Madame D. If he didn't get the honorary title for Shui Rulin at this time, Shui Rulin might not have a chance for a long time. After all, it depended on Qin Huaiyong's fate to apply for a title. If there was no chance to apply for a title or a chance to make meritorious service, Shui Rulin's title of honorary lady would be far away. Moreover, when the family members of Ningyuan Army General's mansion attended the banquet, they would be looked down upon by others, and it would even affect Qin Wanru's marriage. It didn't matter whether Madame D's honorary title was removed or not. What was important was that Shui Rulin had the honorary title. Many families had already taken a fancy to an 11-year-old girl. Madame Dowager understood this. She sighed deeply and shook her head helplessly. "What's the result now?" "The Ministry of Rights will review it again." Qin Huaiyong smiled. In his opinion, since the emperor had given in, it was not a big deal in other places. It would happen sooner or later. As for Madame D's honorary title, the emperor also wanted to put it aside first. After all, Madame D was the legal wife and Duke Yong's sister. In addition, it seemed that someone had put in a good word for Madame D. The emperor wanted to put it aside after the investigation, but he didn't mention the matter of the coachman's interrogation again. Qin Huaiyong understood the meaning of this, so he didn't mention Madame D anymore. Hearing his words, Madame Dowager also breathed a sigh of relief. But after thinking for a while, she hesitated. Duke Yong's mansion won't agree. If they really make trouble, what about Yuru's marriage? It's Madame D who brought this trouble upon herself. Duke Yong's mansion should also know that it has become like this. We also have no choice. For Yuru's good, we have to do this. When Yuru gets married, there must be a mother to control the situation, Qin Huaiyong said in a low voice. Qin Wanru had been standing quietly on one side. She turned her eyes away from Qin Huaiyong's face calmly. Her eyes moved slightly and rippled a little. Chapter 244. Madame of Duke Xing wants to see me? Madame Dowager was stunned and sat up straight. After she came to the capital city, she had been living in seclusion and had never met any guests. She didn't know what Madame of Duke Xing, whom she had never met, meant. Although she had been here once before, she had met Madame D and had nothing to do with her. Yes, she said it was because of Wanru's help to the young master of Duke Xing's mansion. I came here in a hurry last time and didn't bring any gifts, so I didn't see you. Qin Huaiyong glanced at Qin Wanru beside him and said. This explained why she only saw Madame D and not Madame Dowager when she came to Qin's mansion last time. It's not good to come here at this time when the mansion is in such a mess, right? Madame Dowager hesitated and said. Madame of Duke Xing said it was okay and she should come here at this time. Qin Huaiyong said. Should come here? Qin Wanru sneered in her heart. Madame D was restricted in the courtyard, and Madame of Duke Xing couldn't reach out her hands. This time she would come here in person. Madame of Duke Xing is really a person who is affectionate and righteous. Madame Dowager sighed. Qin's mansion was in the teeth of the storm now, and no discerning person was willing to get involved at this time. The fact that Madame of Duke Xing could come to visit her at this time meant that she supported Qin's mansion in a way. How could Madame Dowager not be moved? Even Shui Ruolin, who was sitting aside, nodded repeatedly. She had a good impression of Madame of Duke Xing before she met her. Qin Wanru lowered her head slightly, and her eyes fell on the delicate carvings on the corner of the chair. A trace of coldness flashed in her eyes. Madame of Duke Xing really didn't forget to leave a good impression at any time. At this time, even Grandma and Mother might think that she was really amiable and respectable, but they didn't know that she was the one who stabbed them in the back. Madame of Duke Xing came to Ningyuan Army General's mansion the next day, and she brought a lot of gifts with her. She gave gifts to every master in Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Even Qi Rongji, who lived as a guest, received a few pieces of cloth and a few pieces of jewelry. After Qi Rongji was overjoyed, she also went to Madame Dowager's courtyard with Chuani to thank Madame of Duke Xing. Qin Wanru came late. When she arrived at Madame Dowager's courtyard, she had already heard the laughter. She immediately lifted her skirt and walked in slowly, followed by Nanny Zheng. This time, she didn't bring Qin Yu or Yuru, but only Nanny Zheng. Inside the room, old Grandma was sitting in the main seat with a smile on her face. She was wearing a dark cyan robe with the word Fu on it and a dark cyan forehead cloth with a big red gem in it. She looked very energetic. Shui Ruolin was sitting on her right side. Madame of Duke Xing was sitting in the guest seat, and Qi Rongji was sitting beside her. They were talking happily. Seeing Qin Wanru come in, Madame of Duke Xing looked her up and down and said with a smile, I haven't seen second Miss Qin for a long time, but you are getting more and more beautiful. Madame Dowager is so lucky. Madoff Dowaf of Madoff Ru. With Madoff Mad Madam. Madame of Mad Qin. Qin Wanru stepped forward and bowed deeply to Madame of Duke Xing. When she just got up, her hand was held by Madame of Duke Xing. Madame of Duke Xing seemed to like Qin Wanru very much. It would be great to have a daughter like second Miss Qin. Madame Dowager, what do you think of the previous proposal? She said and looked at Madame Dowager. Qin Wanru's heart suddenly jumped. She immediately realized that it was not good. She calmly pushed away Madame of Duke Xing's hand and bowed to Madame Dowager and Shui Ruolin. I really appreciate Madame's kindness, but I have to tell Zhuozhuo about it. Madame Dowager said with a smile. Her eyes fell on Qin Wanru, full of appreciation. This child is really pitiful. Who could have thought that there would be such a thing? Her nickname is Zhuozhuo? Madame of Duke Xing's face showed a trace of strangeness, but it immediately flashed away. If Qin Wanru had not been paying attention to her, she really would not have found this trace of strangeness. Did her nickname, which only Grandma called her, remind her of something? That's right. This child does have a hard life. Madame Dowager sighed more and more. Looking at Qin Wanru's obedient and docile look, she only felt bitter in her heart. At such a young age, she became an orphan without parents. How could she not be pitiful? The most hateful thing was that Madame D was not virtuous. She had promised that she would treat Zhuozhua as her biological daughter, but in fact she had been making trouble for Zhuozhua. I only have one daughter, and she likes to lecture. She is not around at ordinary times. I really want to have such a lovely daughter by my side. When I saw second Miss Qin before, I liked her very much, but I didn't dare to be presumptuous. When I came to your mansion last time, I wanted to ask Madame D's opinion. I thought Madame D was second Miss Qin's mother, but I didn't expect that I made a mistake. Speaking of this, Madame of Duke Xing smiled at Shui Ruolin with modesty. Shui Ruolin smiled softly. She did have some doubts about this matter, but now she felt that what Madame of Duke Xing said was reasonable. Everyone in the capital knew that Madame D was her cousin's legal wife, but no one knew who she was. It was reasonable that Madame of Duke Xing came to visit Madame D. Come on, take out the gift I prepared for second Miss Qin. Madame of Duke Xing said to an old maid behind her with a smile. The old maid nodded, and two servant girls came forward and presented the brocade box in their hands. How can I accept it? Madame of Duke Xing has sent a gift just now. Madame Dowager waved her hand repeatedly. After Madame of Duke Xing entered the mansion, she sent a gift. Qin Wanru's gift had also been sent to Jifang Pavilion. It was because of this gift that Qin Wanru hurriedly came to express her gratitude to Madame of Duke Xing. Madame of Duke Xing gave another gift. Although Qin Wanru showed a very embarrassed look, she took 2 steps back and was too embarrassed to take it. But her eyes became colder and even a little bit hostile. The clothes given to her before could not be worn casually, but at this time, Madame of Duke Xing gave her a gift again. She was almost sure that Madame of Duke Xing really had other plans for her this time. She stole a glance at Madame Dowager and Shui Ruolin. Both of them looked very happy. Obviously, they were fascinated by Madame of Duke Xing's performance. But she didn't know what kind of vicious thoughts this person had on the surface. With a gentle smile. Seeing Madame of Duke Xing, she thought of the scene when she forced her grandmother to kneel down to apologize in the last life. That kind of humiliation was deeply rooted in her heart and almost dug her heart. In this life, the situation had changed, and Madame of Duke Xing's attitude had also changed. She actually showed a look of wanting to make friends with Qin's mansion, and it seemed that she also wanted to make a move on Qin's mansion from other aspects. The past is the past, and the present is the present. It is my kind intention. I really like second Miss Qin so much. Madame of Duke Xing looked at Qin Wanru lovingly, and her smile became more and more gentle. She stood up, walked in front of the servant girl, and reached out to open a brocade box. A set of head ornaments in it immediately made Qi Rongji jealous and hate, and she almost stared at it. The pearl that was the size of a longan was the most valuable. It was mounted on a gold and jade hairpin, and there were more than a dozen small pearls on the side. Not only was the craftsmanship exquisite, but its value was also immeasurable. It was really a big gift. The value of this hairpin was the sum of the previous gifts, not to mention that there was such a set of matching jewelry and head ornaments. I newly made this hairpin with the most precious pearl in my dowry. Today I will give it to second Miss Qin. I hope Madame Dowager and Madame Shui will be satisfied. Seeing everyone's shocked look, Madame of Duke Xing proudly picked up the hairpin and twirled it, and then opened the second brocade box. There was a pair of jade bracelets. The jade bracelets were crystal clear, which made people happy at first glance. Qi Rongji had seen a lot of jade bracelets, but none of them could compare with this pair. Her heart beat faster and faster. She liked it very much. This pair of bracelets is also my new one. Now I will also give them to second Miss Qin. Madame of Duke Xing said with a smile. Madam, how can I accept it? How dare I accept such valuable things from you? Seeing Madame of Duke Xing looking at her, Qin Wanru took a step back and refused softly. If I accept such valuable things from you, what will others think? They will definitely think that our Qin's mansion is holding you back for your kindness. This is really not good. We appreciate Madame of Duke Xing's kindness, but this gift is indeed too generous for us to accept. Madame Dowager also waved her hand repeatedly. Old Madam, if you agree to my proposal, it's not a big deal. It's just a greeting gift from an elder to a younger one. Moreover, if our two families get closer, our Marquis can also help Ningyuan Army General deal with some things. Otherwise, we won't have a good reason to send troops. Even if we want to help, we can't. Madame of Duke Xing said with a smile. She was not angry because of Qin Wanru's refusal, and her smile became more amiable. After speaking to Madame Dowager, she turned to Qin Wanru and said, "Second Miss, don't be in a hurry to refuse. I really like Second Miss, and I also want to have a junior like Second Mississippi. If Second Miss becomes my junior in the future, it is inevitable that our mansion will send you a dowry in the future." He expressed that he would support Qin Huaiyong, expressed that he really liked Qin Wanru, and said that he would help her choose her marriage and even send her a dowry. It was really hard to find such a good deal. Duke Xing's power in the capital city was far beyond that of ordinary noble families. Madame Dowager looked at Shui Ruolin awkwardly, and Shui Ruolin was also very hesitant. She turned her eyes to Qin Wanru, but it was inconvenient to ask Qin Wanru directly in front of everyone. For a moment, the room was quiet. "Madame Dowager, before I came here, I also reported this matter to Old Madam of our mansion. Old Madam also said that she likes Second Miss Qin very much. If possible, we can also ask the Queen in the palace to correct Second Miss Qin's name. Of course, next, she can also live with the Miss of our Duke Xing's mansion and be raised under the name of our Old Madam for a period of time." Seeing that they were interested, Madame of Duke Xing immediately smiled more affectionately. She did not believe that this could not make them agree. Chapter 245. "Grandma, what are you talking about? Why can't I understand?" Qin Wanru looked at Madame Dowager in astonishment and then looked at Madame of Duke Xing. She looked confused at first and then surprised. "Have you found my mother? Where is she? Is she okay? Is she really in the capital city? No wonder Ruian Great Elder Princess." Speaking of this, Qin Wanru seemed to feel that she had spilled the beans and hurriedly stopped talking. "What did Ruian Great Elder Princess say?" Madame of Duke Xing's face changed uncontrollably and said anxiously. After saying that, she also found that she was too hasty. She hurriedly smiled at Madame Dowager and said, "Madame Dowager, I'm afraid that you don't know the relationship between our mansion and Ruian Great Elder Princess. Because of what happened to my sister-in-law, Ruian Great Elder Princess has always disliked our mansion. I'm afraid that I have offended Ruian Great Elder Princess again." Hearing what she said, Madame Dowager also looked at Qin Wanru with concern. Madame Dowager was not clear about the resentment between Duke Xing's mansion and Ruian Great Elder Princess's mansion, but looking at Madame of Duke Xing's expression, she knew that there must be something behind it. This. Qin Wanru hesitated. "Second Miss Qin, what did Ruian Great Elder Princess say? Please tell me. I know that I am too insignificant in front of Ruian Great Elder Princess, so I dare not speculate in vain." Madame of Duke Xing said with a wry smile. "What Ruian Great Elder Princess said before seems to be related to my mother." Qin Wanru said hesitantly. It seemed that she didn't want to say it, but now she had to say it. "But Ruian Great Elder Princess asked me to wait. I'm not very clear about the details." Qin Wanru lowered her head and pinched the handkerchief in her hand. "Is there really news about your mother?" Madame Dowager was overjoyed and looked at Qin Wanru excitedly. For a moment, she forgot the matter about Madame of Duke Xing. Ruian Great Elder Princess seems to mean it. Now it is still being investigated, so I don't know whether it is true. Qin Wanru made an excuse about Ruian Great Elder Princess. Now she had basically understood what Madame of Duke Xing meant. In the last life, Qin Yuru was raised in Duke Xing's mansion. It was said that Old Madam liked her very much. After that, she doted on Qin Yuru even more and even kept her for a few more years before letting her get married. After getting married, with Duke Xing's mansion as her background, all the noble ladies in the capital city dared not look down on her. Now, it seemed like this matter was going to fall on her head, but she didn't like it. What tricks did Madame of Duke Xing want to play again? She coerced Madame Dowager to agree with this matter. In addition, Madame Dowager had said that she liked Qin Wanru and her daughter. Madame Dowager intended to recognize Qin Wanru as her adopted daughter. With the power of Duke Xing's mansion, if they recognized her as their adopted daughter, it would be reasonable for them to intervene in her marriage. Madame Dowager and Shui Rulin both regarded her as a good person. In addition, she was used to whitewashing her performance. At that time, it might be difficult for her to control them. The only thing he could do now was to stop her. She quietly turned her eyes to Qi Rongji, who was watching on the side with jealousy and hatred. She slightly raised the corners of her mouth, showing an invisible sneer. "The great elder princess wants to find your biological mother for you?" Although Madame of Duke Xing was smiling, it looked a little stiff and less lively than before. "It should be this way," Qin Wanru replied softly. "Madame Dowager, who is second Miss Qin's biological mother?" Madame of Duke Xing suddenly turned to Madame Dowager and asked, which stunned Madame Dowager. Things like this were basically secrets. Although Madame of Duke Xing expressed her love for Qin Wanru and wanted to recognize Qin Wanru as her adopted daughter, it was not now. At this time, it was actually very impolite to ask this matter as if it was a family member. As a noble madam of an aristocratic family, it was impossible for Madame of Duke Xing to not know it. But she just asked in this way, so Madame Dowager didn't know how to answer for a moment. "Grandma, you haven't told me about my biological mother yet. You haven't told me before." Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes and looked at old Madame Qin aggrievedly with sadness in her eyes. This made old Madame Qin feel more and more difficult to explain. Seeing Madame Dowager's look, Shui Rulin also knew that she was in a dilemma. She immediately smiled and said to help, "Wanru, don't worry. When your grandma is free, I will tell you about your biological mother." Of course, she didn't want to say it here. After all, it was also a secret, and not anyone could hear it. "Thank you, Grandma." Qin Wanru bowed, then stood up with red eyes and retreated to Qi Rongji's side. Now there were only 2 unmarried girls in this room, so it was normal for them to come together. "Madame Dowager, have you met second Miss Qin's biological mother?" Madame of Duke Xing was very anxious. Although she still had an easygoing smile on her face, her words became more and more impolite. Just now Shui Rulin had said that this kind of thing should be told to Qin Wanru first, but now Madame of Duke Xing showed great interest. This made Madame Dowager a little unhappy. At this time, Madame of Duke Xing shouldn't ask so carefully, and she kept asking, which made Madame Dowager's heart move. "Madam, of course I have met her. As a member of our mansion, how can I not know her?" Madame Dowager said lightly. "Madame Dowager, can you tell me about second Miss Qin's biological mother? The woman who can give birth to such a smart and beautiful girl as second Miss Qin must be an outstanding woman." Madame of Duke Xing seemed to be more and more interested, and her words became more and more impolite. After saying that, she also felt a little bad, looked at Qin Wanru guiltily and said, "I really like this child. This thing is really a long story, and it is not convenient to tell Madam here." Madame Dowager coughed in a low voice to hide the displeasure in her eyes. She did have a good impression of Madame of Duke Xing, but Madame of Duke Xing repeatedly asked about Qin Wanru's biological mother, which made her a little unhappy. If this kind of thing could be said, why didn't she tell Zhuozhuo clearly until now? Madame of Duke Xing expressed her love for Zhuozhuo, but now in Madame Dowager's eyes, she was just an outsider. Is Madame of Duke Xing here to recognize her daughter today? Standing beside Qi Rongji, Qin Wanru lowered her voice and asked curiously. Qi Rongji came earlier than her and heard more than her, so she should know. Qi Rongji glared at Qin Wanru and also lowered her voice. How could Qin Wanru be so lucky to be chosen by Madame of Duke Xing? What a pity! Qin Wanru sighed in a low voice. What do you mean? Qi Rongji almost pricked up her ears. Madame of Duke Xing means that she wants a well-behaved and obedient daughter, and she will be raised by old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion. But I am afraid I can't, and great elder princess? Qin Wanru said hesitantly in a low voice, and turned to look at the box in the hands of 2 servant girls, looking very covetous. Who wouldn't like such a beautiful pearl headpiece and that pair of bracelets? It's a pity that Big Sister is not here, otherwise I can let Big Sister ask for it herself. Qin Wanru sighed again. Qi Rongji's eyes suddenly lit up, and she couldn't help but breathe a little faster. She looked at Madame of Duke Xing, and then looked at the box in the hands of two servant girls, and clenched the handkerchief in her hand more tightly. If Qin Yuru could do it, why couldn't she? She could also be a well-behaved and obedient adopted daughter. Thinking of the meaning in this, how could Qi Rongji not be tempted? This was a good opportunity. Madam Dowager, what about the thing before? I really want such a well-behaved and obedient daughter. Madame of Duke Xing also knew that she was a little too eager, so she hurriedly hid the anxiety in the bottom of her eyes and changed the topic again. Hearing this, Madame Dowager hesitated and turned her eyes to Qin Wanru. Seeing that Qin Wanru shook her head calmly, she became more and more uncertain in her heart. She had seen Qin Wanru's performance these days. Although this granddaughter was young, she was knowledgeable. Since she said that she was unwilling, there must be a reason. Although she still thought Madame of Duke Xing was very good and it would be of great help to Qin Wanru to recognize Madame of Duke Xing as her adopted mother, of course, it was inconvenient for Qin Wanru to make a decision like this because Qin Wanru was unwilling. Madam, let me and think about it, okay? Madame of Duke Xing said helplessly. She knew that she was too eager just now, so that she lost her composure and made Madame Dowager suspicious. But her mentality changed very quickly, and immediately put on a gentle smile on her face. Even if second Miss Qin and I are not destined to be together, I still have to express my gratitude. As she said this, she waved her hand. The two servant girls holding the gift box immediately understood, and immediately walked in front of Qin Wanru and respectfully presented the gift box, which meant that no matter what the result was, she still had to give the gift. Madam, I am willing to worship you as my adopted mother, and I will definitely show filial piety to you in the future. Seeing the two gift boxes appear in front of her, Qi Rongji breathed rapidly, and her eyes were greedy. After thinking for a while, she couldn't bear it anymore. She took 2 steps forward, knelt down in front of Madame of Duke Xing, and said respectfully. She knelt down so suddenly that people in the room didn't expect it. For a moment, everyone looked at her in astonishment. Although Qi Rongji's face was red, she still respectfully kowtowed to Madame of Duke Xing. Madam, rest assured. Even if your biological daughter is not with you all the time, I will treat myself as your biological daughter and show filial piety to you. For the sake of wealth, Qi Rongji also risked everything this time. Not only her face was red, but even her neck was red. But she still looked at Madame of Duke Xing eagerly, hoping that Madame of Duke Xing could regard her as her adopted daughter, and from then on, her status would skyrocket. Since Madame of Duke Xing specially prepared a gift for her, she must have a very good impression of her. She firmly believed that she would do better than Qin Wanru, and she was filial to Madame of Duke Xing. It happened suddenly. Madame of Duke Xing was still preparing to say something to finalize the matter of Qin Wanru, but was disturbed by Qi Rongji. Seeing Qi Rongji's expectant and greedy eyes, Madame of Duke Xing was so angry that her hands trembled. She was still thinking about how to trick Qin Wanru into Duke Xing's mansion, but she didn't expect that others also had ideas about her. This made Madame of Duke Xing, who had always felt that the overall situation was in her hands, angry. Chapter 246. Miss Qi, please get up. Let's talk about it when your elders come to the capital city. After thinking for a while, Madame of Duke Xing said slowly with a serious face. The old maid behind her hurried to help Qi Rongji up. Although it was an acceptable reason to be rejected, Qi Rongji's face was full of shame. She burst into tears, turned around, covered her face, and ran out. Grandma, I'm going to see first Miss Qi. Qin Wanru said hurriedly and chased after her. Nanny Zheng, who had been standing at the door and didn't follow her in, wanted to follow her, but Qin Wanru shook her hand and reached out to signal her to go inside. Nanny Zheng understood and asked a little servant girl to follow Qin Wanru out. She still stood outside the curtain at the door. There was a good thing here. The people inside could not see her, but she could hear the sound inside. Thank you for your kindness, Madame of Duke Xing. Let's talk about it later. I can't accept the gift now. Madame Dowager said with a smile in the room, but she was not as friendly as before. In this case, I won't force you. Madame Dowager and Ning Yuan Army General can discuss it. If it weren't for second Miss Qin's kindness to Hao, I wouldn't come here at this time. Madame of Duke Xing said with a smile. At this time, her expression had returned to normal. She sat in the chair dignifiedly, and the two servant girls retreated behind her. Thank you for your kindness, Madame of Duke Xing. Madame Dowager said sincerely. In Madame Dowager's opinion, those who could still come here at this time were people who valued friendship and righteousness. She could talk to Zhuozhua about it later. It was indeed beneficial to have a marriage with Duke Xing's mansion. Madame of Duke Xing took off a bracelet from her wrist and said, "That Miss Qi is quite bold just now, but our Duke Xing's mansion can't accept anyone. But after all, it's not very good. Nanny Xing, go and see how she is doing. Give this bracelet of mine to her. It can be regarded as our fate." Originally, she wanted to find a chance to send someone out to ask about the news. Since someone bumped into her, it was just right, and it saved her a lot of trouble. Her words were very generous and decent. "Yes, madam." The old maid behind her hurriedly stepped forward to take it respectfully, and then left in a hurry with the bracelet. It was between Qi Rongji and Madame of Duke Xing, so it was inconvenient for Madame Dowager to show up. She had intended to ask someone to take the old maid there, but the old maid had already lifted the curtain and left. While they were still chatting, Nanny Xing of Duke Xing's mansion came out of the courtyard, stopped an old maid who did rough work in the courtyard, and asked her about the courtyard where Qi Rongji lived. Then she walked out of the outer courtyard without asking anyone to lead the way. However, when she got out of the courtyard and looked at the direction, she didn't leave in the direction pointed out by the old maid just now. Instead, she turned in another direction and hurriedly walked over. Not far behind her, Nanny Xing stared at her closely and followed her all the way. After turning in several directions, the old maid actually went to Yulan Pavilion skillfully. As expected, she went to find Madame D, and she seemed to be very familiar with the way. If she hadn't been here several times, someone must have given her a detailed map. There were two rough old maids guarding the door of Yulan Pavilion, and the door was tightly closed. The old maid looked at it from a distance, stopped and frowned. It seemed that it was impossible to enter Yulan Pavilion in this way. When she was hesitating, she suddenly saw the door slightly open, and Mei Shui came out with a small basket. She thanked the two old maids at the door profusely, took out two pouches from her sleeves, and handed them to them. The two old maids took it with a smile, waved their hands, and let Mei Shui go. After Mei Shui came out, she didn't leave immediately. She turned around and saw Nanny Xing of Duke Xing's mansion waving to her at the next intersection. Her eyes lit up, and she looked around. The two rough old maids guarding Yulan Pavilion had already paid no attention to her, and hurriedly and cautiously ran over. Nanny Xing took Mei Shui to hide behind a big tree, lowered her voice, and asked, "What did your madam say?" "Our madam said that everything is up to you. Look, this is the address of those people." Mei Shui quickly took out a letter from the basket and handed it to Nanny Xing. Nanny Xing hurriedly took it, put it in her arms, and turned to leave in another direction. This time, Nanny Xing went to Qi Rongji's guest courtyard. The reason why she knew it so clearly was that the map she had received before detailed the place where everyone lived in the mansion. But even if she had remembered it clearly before, halfway, Nanny Xing still reached out to take out a hand-drawn map from her arms and wanted to take it out to have a look. She remembered the road from Madame Dowager's courtyard to Madame D very clearly, but she was not so clear about the way from Madame D to Qi Rongji's guest courtyard. Originally, Qi Rongji's matter was an accident, but it happened to be used by Madame of Duke Xing. Nanny Xing stood still and looked at it for a while. After recognizing the direction, she held the hand-drawn map in her hand. After walking for a while, she took it out again to have a look. Since she used Qi Rongji as an excuse, she had to go to the guest courtyard to have a look and go through the formalities. What she had to do had been done. Nanny Xing was very relaxed at this time and was not as vigilant as before. When she took it out again to have a look, suddenly a person came from the opposite side and happened to hit Nanny Xing. The person was so strong that Nanny Xing took 2 steps back and fell to the ground hard. The map in her hand had already fallen down. "Don't you have eyes when you walk?" Nanny Xing was hit and couldn't get up for a while. She shouted angrily. She was the henchman of Madame of Duke Xing and had always been very arrogant in Duke Xing's mansion. Don't you have eyes? Nanny Xing picked up the map from the ground and looked at it. She didn't pull Nanny Xing up and said coldly, "What do you mean? You are just a servant. How can you be so arrogant? Who gave you the courage?" Nanny Xing was so angry that her face turned blue. She stood up with the help of a tree on one side and scolded her sternly. Although the person opposite looked beautiful and imposing, she was wearing the clothes of a servant. Nanny Xing was really not afraid of the servant of Ningyuan Army General's mansion. "Aren't you a servant?" Nanny Xing said coldly and shook the map in her hand. "Tell me, where did you get this map? Why do you have the hand-drawn map of our mansion in your hand? And it is so detailed. What do you want to do? Give me the map." Nanny Xing was a little flustered. She looked around and lowered her voice and said angrily, "Do you want to hurt the master of our mansion?" Nanny Xing took a step back and her face became colder and colder. "Where does this cheap servant come from? What nonsense are you talking about? Give it back to me or I will make you suffer," Nanny Xing threatened. At this time, there were no outsiders around, so she also breathed a sigh of relief. She was just a servant. How could the servant of Ningyuan Army General's mansion dare to offend her? "You plot against the master of our mansion and dare to threaten me. Well, let's go to report it to Madame Dowager now and see what Madame Dowager will say," Nanny Xing said with a sneer. She took a step back and raised the map in her hand. "Ask where this map comes from. What are you looking for in our mansion with this map? Give the map back to me." Seeing that Nanny Xing was going to complain, Nanny Xing was angry and anxious. She put her hands on her hips and threatened loudly, "I am a servant of Madame of Duke Xing. I came here with our Madame today. Even if something happens, what can your Madame Dowager do to me? At that time, as long as I say that this map is yours, Madame Dowager won't disrespect our Madame." Of course, it was better not to make a big deal out of it. Nanny Xing also understood this. "Madame of Duke Xing came to our mansion to meet our Madame Dowager, but secretly asked you to look for someone with the map. The direction you came from should be Madame D's courtyard, right? You even secretly went to meet Madame D. Could it be that Madame of Duke Xing came to our mansion today not to thank our second miss, but actually to contact Madame D?" Nanny Zhang's face changed and she said loudly. Her guess was very accurate. She almost guessed the interaction between Madame of Duke Xing and Madame D. Nanny Xing's face also changed. She rushed forward and wanted to grab the map in Nanny Zhang's hand. Nanny Zhang had been prepared. She took a step back and ran away. Nanny Xing chased after her and said, "If you dare to talk nonsense, our Madame will definitely ask your Madame Dowager to punish you later. Let's see whether your Madame Dowager believes you, a servant or our Madame." Madame of Duke Xing's identity was far inferior to Madame Dowager of Qin's mansion. For this reason, although Nanny Xing panicked, she did not lose her composure. It was just a small Ningyuan army general's mansion. Did they really dare to disrespect their Madame? "Your Madame of Duke Xing conspired against our general's mansion." Nanny Zheng was much younger than Nanny Xing, so she naturally ran very fast. Moreover, she was familiar with the way. After a few turns, she took a shortcut to Qin Huayong's study. "Stop it, you! How dare you steal our Madame's things? Stop now!" Nanny Xing suddenly shouted loudly. It seemed that she wanted others to hear her shouting, which was completely different from her sneaky behavior just now. However, Nanny Zheng ignored her and turned into a yard in front of her. A servant was guarding at the door of the yard. Hearing the sound coming from outside, he hurriedly ran out and met Nanny Zheng, who had already run to the door. "Is the general here?" Nanny Zheng asked in a low voice. "Yes, inside." The servant hurriedly nodded. He knew Nanny Zheng. "Second miss, are you looking for the general? There is an old maid of Duke Xing's mansion outside. She took this map and searched for something in our mansion. Give this map to the general." Nanny Zheng handed the map in her hand to the servant, but she did not go into the yard. Instead, she ran around the yard for a while. Nanny Zheng finally caught up with her panting. Seeing Nanny Zheng resting against the wall in front of her, she immediately quickened her pace and rushed over. "Do you want to die? Give the map back to me." As long as I say that you stole our madam's things, you can only be beaten to death. When she ran to Nanny Zheng, Nanny Sheng also lost her strength. She leaned against the wall and glared at Nanny Zheng fiercely. Chapter 247. There was only a high wall here, and there was no one around, so Nanny Zheng was really not afraid of being hurt. Where did you get the map? Why do you have such a detailed map of our mansion? Why did you go to Madame D's place just now? Does your Madame of Duke Xing want to do something with Madame D that can't be known by others? Nanny Zheng raised her eyebrows and looked at Nanny Sheng aggressively. Nanny Sheng was Madame of Duke Xing's personal nanny and had seen a lot of things, but compared with Nanny Zheng, she was still a little inferior. After so many years in the palace, Nanny Zheng had climbed up from a small palace made to the position of confidant. The meaning of this was not comparable to that of a nanny of a madam of an aristocratic family. Do you want to die quickly? How dare you talk nonsense like this? Let's see whether your master can protect you or my madam can kill you. Nanny Sheng said fiercely. Your madam? Does Madam of Duke Xing come to our mansion today for another purpose? The cold snort was just beside her, and it was a man's majestic voice. Nanny Sheng's face changed greatly. She suddenly turned around and saw that a closed door on the high wall was opened. Qin Huaiyong stood at the door with his hands behind his back and a gloomy face. Nanny Sheng actually didn't know Qin Huaiyong, but she had seen a lot of people. There was only one person in Qin's mansion who dressed like this, so she immediately panicked and changed her face. General. Nanny Zheng stepped forward and saluted. Nanny Zheng, did you find anything? Qin Huaiyong couldn't treat Nanny Zheng as an ordinary servant, so he asked her with a gentler look. Ningyuan Army General, it's this servant in your mansion who framed me. He deliberately said some specious words and deliberately led me here. He just wanted to frame my madam and me for being unjust. Seeing this, Nanny Zheng became anxious and immediately shouted to defend herself, while glaring at Nanny Zheng fiercely. She didn't believe that an old maid of General's mansion was more convincing than her. Search her for what she took. Qin Huaiyong said coldly. The two servants behind him came over and grabbed Nanny Zheng on each side. Nanny Zheng came over and searched her. She immediately took out an envelope from her arms and presented it to Qin Huaiyong respectfully. When Nanny Zheng saw it, she felt dizzy and couldn't help trembling. But she was different from ordinary people. She gritted her teeth and said nothing more. She would wait until Madam came. Anyway, the letter did not say anything, so it was not important evidence. Would Ningyuan Army General's mansion dare to offend Madam because of a servant's words? At most, this matter would be loud thunder, but small raindrops. When the time comes, a big problem would be reduced to a small one, and a small one would be nothing. Qin Huaiyong took the letter, turned around, and walked into the courtyard, followed by two servants carrying Nanny Zheng. Nanny Zheng also followed them in and closed the side door of this place. When Madame of Duke Xing was invited over, Nanny Zheng was forced to kneel in the corridor. Seeing Madame of Duke Xing come in, Nanny Zheng hurriedly called, Madam! What's going on? Madame of Duke Xing's face darkened. She was about to walk over and ask the two servants to let Nanny Zheng go. Madam, please. My father is still waiting inside. When Qin Huaiyong sent someone to invite Madame of Duke Xing, Qin Wanru happened to return to Madame Dowager's Xining Pavilion. She asked to accompany Madame of Duke Xing. At this time, she smiled faintly and said, It was against the rules to let someone go before seeing the master. Let's go. Madame of Duke Xing also came to her senses at this time. She smiled again and said slowly, with her deep eyes falling on Qin Wanru. In the study, Qin Huaiyong was sitting. When he saw Madame of Duke Xing coming over, he stood up and greeted her. Then they sat down according to the host and the guest. Qin Wanru took a few steps forward and stood behind Qin Huaiyong. She glanced at Nanny Zheng who was standing on the side. Nanny Zheng nodded to her silently with a slight smile on her lips. What does Ningyuan Army General mean? Why did you detain my old maid? Did my old maid do something to annoy the general? Madame of Duke Xing asked lightly after sitting down. Qin Huaiyong looked at Nanny Zheng. Nanny Zheng nodded and stood out. She told the whole process again with a serious face. Of course, the reason was that Nanny Sheng asked to find the guest courtyard where Miss Qi lived, but actually went to Madame D's courtyard. This attracted Nanny Zheng's attention, so Qin Huaiyong followed her there. Nanny Zheng's words were very orderly. She saw the whole process in detail. In the end, there was a simple map and a letter as evidence. These two pieces of evidence now fell on Qin Huaiyong's desk. Qin Huaiyong had seen them just now. The map was very detailed, and even some special places at corners were clearly marked. There were several names and an address in the envelope, but nothing else. Qin Huaiyong didn't understand what these were for at the moment. Madame of Duke Xing was very calm. Even if Nanny Zheng said everything in detail and had evidence, she didn't panic. After Nanny Zheng finished, she slightly raised the corners of her mouth and showed a trace of sarcasm. Ningyuan Army General, did you confirm that the people in my mansion did something against the rules just based on the one-sided words of a servant in your mansion? Are the servants of our Duke Xing's mansion inferior to the servants of your general's mansion? Qin Huaiyong was just an official of the third level of the secondary class, while Duke Xing was a first-class duke's mansion. Moreover, Duke Xing himself was a first-class official. From this point of view, Ningyuan Army General's mansion and Duke Xing's mansion naturally couldn't be compared. As for the servants, they were also divided into 3, 6, and 9 grades, and Duke Xing's mansion was undoubtedly the highest grade. Madame of Duke Xing's words could be said to hurt Qin Huaiyong's heart. She knew that Qin Huaiyong would not dare to agree. Madam, you're right. The old maid in your mansion really can't compare with Nanny Zheng. Qin Wanru answered with a smile and bowed slightly to Nanny Zheng politely. Nanny Zheng stood straight and accepted Qin Wanru's half-bow before leaving. Then she also bowed to Qin Wanru. Her behavior was impeccable. Such a behavior, and even dared to accept her master's half-bow was not something that ordinary servants could do. Who is she? Madame of Duke Xing's expression changed slightly for the first time. She is a nanny released from the palace and my etiquette instructor. She can't be compared with ordinary servants. She sold herself for more convenience. Madam, do you think I'm right? Qin Wanru said unhurriedly. She deliberately took Nanny Zheng out instead of Qing Yu and Yu Jie because of the suppression of her identity. The etiquette instructor released from the Imperial Palace could not be compared with ordinary servants. Even if this person was the servant of the Madame of Marquis, so what? Madame of Duke Xing's face became very ugly. She certainly knew this Nanny Zheng. At the beginning, she had planned this matter, but she did not expect that things would change later. In fact, the identity of Nanny Zheng was not only an etiquette instructor in the palace, but also related to other things. Therefore, when Nanny Zheng was released from the palace, no one dared to invite her. But this did not prevent some people who knew the inside story from avoiding Nanny Zheng, because she used to be a chief palace maid. Madame of Duke Xing, I am not as good as the words of a servant in your mansion? Nanny Zheng's eyes fell on Madame of Duke Xing and she said slowly. What Nanny Zheng said is naturally true, but there may be a misunderstanding. Madame of Duke Xing immediately adjusted her thoughts and said with a smile. Can I ask my old maid what on earth is going on? Madam, please. Qin Huaiyong nodded and asked someone to bring Nanny Xing in. As soon as she entered the door, Nanny Xing broke away from the hands of the two servants, rushed to the feet of Madame of Duke Xing, and cried loudly, Madam, it is that cheap servant who framed me. It is obvious that everything is planned by her. I don't know how I offended her and let her make such rumors and make trouble. Since Madame of Duke Xing was here, Nanny Xing would not be afraid of anyone at this time. She pointed at Nanny Zheng and scolded angrily. But a slap made Nanny Xing kneel on the ground. She was stunned and looked at Madame of Duke Xing, who looked cold and fierce in front of her. She could not come to herself for a moment. Madam. This is Nanny Zheng, an etiquette instructor from the palace. Now she is teaching second Miss Qin in Ningyuan Army General's mansion. How can a servant like you point at her at will? Madame of Duke Xing said coldly and scolded angrily. Nanny Xing was stunned, but immediately came to herself. After looking at Madame of Duke Xing, she cried out her grievance loudly, Madam, I am wronged. I just asked for the way and then went out to find it. Later, I met a servant girl and asked for the way. I knew I went the wrong way. As for the map, I picked it up on the road. Qin Wanru looked at the interaction between Madam of Duke Xing and Nanny Sheng and sneered in her heart. Nanny Sheng was indeed a trusted subordinate for many years. As Madam of Duke Xing did this, Nanny Sheng immediately understood. Qin Wanru glanced at Nanny Sheng's face silently with her watery eyes. Sometimes it did not need too much evidence to determine whether something was true or not. You got lost first, and then picked up the simple map of General's mansion? Madam of Duke Xing frowned and asked helplessly. Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and continued to listen calmly without refuting. Yes, that's it. Madam, I am really wronged. Nanny Sheng became louder and louder. She even rubbed her red eyes and looked extremely wronged. You old servant, why don't you come to report to me immediately? Madam of Duke Xing was exasperated at Nanny Sheng's failure to meet her expectations and punched Nanny Sheng's shoulder hard. Madam, I just wanted to come back and tell you later. I didn't expect such a misunderstanding. Nanny Sheng cried out her grievance again. Chapter 248. Since it is a misunderstanding, madam, please go back. Qin Huaiyong said calmly. He didn't even ask whether it was true or not, and he didn't even ask for confirmation. However, from his tone, it was obvious that he didn't believe it, and his attitude was much colder. Besides, he seemed to want to drive her away, which made Madam of Duke Xing feel embarrassed. However, this topic was directly cut off by Qin Huaiyong, so she had no way to say it. Madam of Duke Xing had prepared a lot of words to explain, but she found that her explanation was useless. She had a feeling that she was going to throw a heavy punch, but in the end, her punch fell on cotton. For a moment, she looked embarrassed. Fortunately, she was just embarrassed for a while. Madame of Duke Xing stood up and said with a displeased look, "Since it is a misunderstanding, it is good to explain it now. Then I will leave." Qin Huaiyong nodded and stood up as if he was going to see her off. Madame of Duke Xing's identity was there, and necessary respect was necessary. "Father, I will see Madame of Duke Xing off," Qin Wanru said softly. Qin Huaiyong nodded and didn't insist. He sat down again and looked at the two evidences on the table. His look made Madame of Duke Xing's eyebrows twitch involuntarily, and she was a little flustered. However, thinking that there was nothing written on it, even if Qin Huaiyong saw it, it didn't matter. She turned and left immediately, and Qin Wanru followed her to see her off. After a few steps, Madame of Duke Xing slowed down. She looked back at Qin Wanru and gently waved her hand, motioning her to come forward. When she came forward, Madame of Duke Xing said affectionately, "I wanted to adopt you as my daughter. I really like second miss, and I want to raise you as my biological daughter and make you the miss of our Duke Xing's mansion. But now it seems that I can't do that. I am afraid that your father has a prejudice against me." Qin Wanru sneered in her heart. At this point, Madame of Duke Xing still deceived her as an ignorant child. "Thank you for your kindness, madam." Qin Wanru slightly folded her sleeves and said, "You are so likable. Originally, your grandmother also agreed to it, but I didn't expect that such a thing would happen. If you can become my adopted daughter, you will definitely become a famous miss of an aristocratic family in the capital city in the future. With the background of Duke Xing's mansion, you can even marry a prince or a prince in the future," Madame of Duke Xing said with a tempting tone. Then she sighed as if she was talking to herself, but Qin Wanru happened to hear it. "I don't know who made this thing become like this today. It's such a coincidence. In the past, when I was in the mansion, this old servant was quite useful. It meant that what Nanny Xing had done in Qin's mansion today was used by someone with ulterior motives, and the purpose was to make use of eunuch's good thing for Qin Wanru." Qin Wanru's butterfly-like long eyelashes fluttered slightly to hide the malice at the bottom of her eyes. Madame of Duke Xing really coaxed others as fools as usual. In this case, she still coaxed Qin Wanru, saying that this matter was framed by someone with ulterior motives and pushing all the blame onto Madame D. She pushed all the blame away. Qin Wanru showed a trace of gratitude on her face, but she did not answer. She looked a little dull and seemed to be childish and not very sensible. Your grandmother is old, and your mother is pregnant now. Even if I have the intention, I can't do anything. No matter whether this thing succeeds or not, if you have any difficulties in the future, you can still come to me directly. I will definitely help you if I can. It can be said that it is a predestined relationship between us. Madame of Duke Xing sighed with satisfaction. Along the way, Madame of Duke Xing coaxed and flattered Qin Wanru, constantly expressing that she really liked Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru treated her with a smile, but did not tell the truth. Qin Wanru sent Madame of Duke Xing to the gate of the mansion, and then turned to walk to Qin Huaiyong's study. In the study, Qin Huaiyong was still looking at the names and addresses on the envelope. After thinking about it, he could not figure out who these names were. As for the address, it was even more ordinary, not like a mansion. Father, who are these people? After Qin Wanru came in and saluted, she looked at the names on the envelope curiously. I don't know. I have never heard of them. Qin Huaiyong shook his head. Then why did Madame give this letter to Madame of Duke Xing? Qin Wanru said in surprise. After saying that, she seemed to feel that she had said something wrong. She stopped talking and looked at Qin Huaiyong pitifully. After all, Madame of Duke Xing did not admit that she had anything to do with Madame D in the end. I don't know. Fortunately, Qin Huaiyong did not mean to blame her and said gently. This map is really well drawn. It is really a simple map. Madame of Duke Xing also said just now. Who on earth drew it? Qin Wanru raised her small face. It seemed that she wanted to change the previous topic, and pointed to the simple map placed aside and said, Madame of Duke Xing did say that it was a simple map before, but when she said that, she did not look at the map at all. From this, it could be seen that she lied. Qin Huaiyong's eyes moved from the letter to the simple map, and his face became cold. It was a simple map of the general's mansion, and it was drawn so carefully. If someone with evil intentions got it, it was very easy to get into trouble. There were not many people in this mansion who could draw it so clearly. After thinking for a while, he stood up and put the 2 pieces of evidence into his sleeve. He said to Qin Wanru, You go back first. I will deal with it for you. His father. Then I will go to accompany mother and grandmother. Qin Wanru nodded obediently and turned to leave. Suddenly, she seemed to suddenly think of something. She turned around hurriedly and said, Father, the surname of those people just now seems to be the same as the surname of the person mother married before. Hearing this, Qin Huaiyong's face immediately became fierce. He suddenly thought of a person. Madam, there is no more news about this matter? The carriage of Duke Xing's mansion moved slowly. In the carriage, Madame of Duke Xing had long lost the gentleness in Qin's mansion. She leaned on the cushion with a cold face and half closed her eyes. Looking at her expression, Nanny Xing asked cautiously. With what happened today, I am afraid it is impossible to make them let down their guard and let Qin Wanru regard me as her adoptive mother. Madame of Duke Xing said coldly. She slowly opened her eyes and looked at Nanny Xing coldly. Madam, it is all my fault. I did not expect that the servant was actually from the palace. If I had known it, I would have snatched it back at that time. Seeing that the situation was not good, Nanny Xing directly knelt down in the carriage and slapped herself mercilessly. Her face immediately swelled up. Well, it seems that someone is deliberately watching this matter. Madame of Duke Xing sneered and said, It was too coincidental. It seemed that Nanny Xing was targeted as soon as she went out. This should not be intentional. You see, later General's mansion did not say anything about this matter. Nanny Xing ignored the swelling pain on her face and said hurriedly, If she was really targeted by someone deliberately and she did not know it, then she was too useless. Maybe Madame of Duke Xing wanted to change a confidant. This reason made Madame of Duke Xing silent for a while. Until now, she still could not figure out whether this matter was really an accident or intentional. If it was intentional, who was it? It was unlikely for Madame D, and it seemed impossible for Madame Shui, and it was even more impossible for Madame Dowager. Madame Dowager had intended to let Qin Wanru directly recognize her before. Was it Qin Huaiyong? It was impossible for a general to care about this kind of inner court heart. Then there was only Qin Wanru. Madame of Duke Xing directly rejected this answer. Just now, on the way here, she also observed Qin Wanru's expression. It did not look like it. Madam, what should we do next? Those are the places where the people of Madame Shui's husband's family live. Now we don't know where they live. Nanny Xing did not read the letter just now, so she did not know what the address given by Madame D was. She had secretly communicated with Madame D before. This time, she sent the addresses of several close relatives of Shui Ruolin's husband's family that Madame D found from Jiangzhou to Madame of Duke Xing, and Madame of Duke Xing instructed them to make trouble. Let's not care about this for now. We haven't taken over yet. Even if something happens, it has nothing to do with us. Madame of Duke Xing said coldly. The falling curtain blocked the light, which made her look a little gloomy. But, in this way, the contact with Qin's mansion will be cut off. You want to second Miss Qin, but you can't. Nanny Xing was afraid that she would bear the responsibility in the end, so she secretly observed Madame of Duke Xing's face and cautiously reminded her. It was better to be reminded by herself than by others. Humph, if she doesn't want to have anything to do with me, then let her have to have something to do with me. Let her come to me and beg me. Madame of Duke Xing sneered, and her lips curved with cold sarcasm. A small Ningyuan army general's mansion dares to challenge our Duke Xing's mansion. She doesn't know whether she is qualified or not. That's right. A small general's mansion has just entered the capital city, and she thinks that she is a bigwig in the capital city. She doesn't know whether she is qualified or not. Nanny Xing hurriedly despised Qin Huaiyong with her master. Then she tilted her head and asked cautiously, Madam, what should we do next? Let's wait and see. I will definitely get Qin Wanru. Madame of Duke Xing said viciously, with a trace of sharpness flashing in her eyes. This girl could not be kept alive. Does R and Great Elder Princess know something? Nanny Xing was shocked, shrank her neck, and felt a little cold at the back of her head. She was not afraid of Ningyuan Army General's mansion, but she was still afraid of R and Great Elder Princess. Duke Xing's mansion was a first-class duke's mansion, and R and Great Elder Princess's identity was even more noble. She won't know. How could she know? Zhuizhua, it's really her. Madame of Duke Xing's voice sounded extremely cold in the narrow carriage, and the faint smile on her face was even more frightening. She has been suppressing me before. Now I will let her see who is the most noble one. Now she is just a fool. How can she compete with me? Spread the news that I want to accept Qin Wanru as my adopted daughter, and say that I specially went to Qin's mansion to have a look, and I am very satisfied. Nanny Xing did not dare to speak. She lowered her head deeply, with cold sweat on her back. Even as a trusted subordinate, she did not know much about this matter, and did not dare to hear too much. She would rather not know this kind of thing. Chapter 249. Miss, the general went to find the first miss. Was it painted by the first miss? Yu Jie reported. Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and said with certainty, It's not her. If it's not the first miss, why did the general go to find the first miss angrily? Yu Jie asked in confusion. She had guessed that it was not the first miss who painted it. It was painted by Madame D. Qin Wanru said slowly and sat down in a pavilion to have a rest. It was a good day today. The wind was not strong, and the sunshine was warm. This pavilion outside the rockery could block the wind and enjoy the sunshine. It was a good place. It could also have a wide view. Since it was painted by Madame D, why did she find the first miss? It seems that this has nothing to do with the first miss, right? Yu Jie said. It was Mei Shui who contacted the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion. Mei Shui is Qin Yuru's servant. Duke Xing's mansion can deny it, but Mei Shui can't. Father locked Madame D and grounded Qin Yuru, but Mei Shui went to find Madame D. This is originally wrong. Qin Wanru said slowly. Compared with Madame D, Qin Yuru was a better breakthrough, and it was indeed Mei Shui, Qin Yuru's servant girl, who intervened in it. Yu Jie was also smart. Hearing Qin Wanru's words, She immediately understood and nodded repeatedly. It's my mistake. It is indeed the first miss who caused the trouble. But why did Madame of Duke Xing do this? Isn't she on good terms with our mansion? At this time, she came to our mansion and thanked Mississippi. Is this all fake? If it were not for the matter of Nanny Xing, everyone in the mansion would think that Madame of Duke Xing was an affectionate and righteous person. She was also good to Qin's mansion and appreciated Qin Wanru very much. Why does Madame of Duke Xing appreciate me? Qin Wanru smiled and said meaningfully. Because she thanked you for saving Master Hao. Yu Jie said. Madame of Duke Xing is good to Hao? Qin Wanru shook her head and leaned lazily on the pillar of the pavilion. This is not good, but she has to pretend on the surface. Yu Jie understood at first, and then she was at a loss. Why didn't she do it earlier? Why do you have to do it now? Qin Wanru narrowed her eyes. When her grandmother called her Zhuozhua, Madame of Duke Xing didn't seem to be abnormal. But when she looked closely, her smile at that time was very strange and her eyes were very gloomy. This meant that his nickname had affected her greatly. Even though Madame of Duke Xing's expression was fleeting at that time, Qin Wanru still caught the unconcealable gloominess and fear on her face. Madame of Duke Xing had heard of this name. I don't know. Could it be that she needs to prepare? Yu Jie asked. It's possible. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and sat up straight. Her eyes fell on the person who was walking over slowly, and her lips curled up silently. Sure enough, Qi Rongji couldn't sit still. Since Qi Rongji was able to enter the capital city and live in the Qin's mansion, she must have some backing. Otherwise, the crafty magistrate Qi would not be so at ease. Well, I need it too. Yu Jie followed her gaze and immediately saw Qi Rongji, who came over with a gloomy face. She immediately stood behind Qin Wanru obediently. Her miss just said that she would wait for first Miss Qi here. Yu Jie now admired second miss more and more. Originally, she thought that she was older than second miss and could be counted as second miss's senior sister, so she should give second miss some advice. Unexpectedly, second miss, who looked like a jade doll, was more intelligent than others. However, such second miss was inexplicably convincing and reassuring. Several people of Jifang Pavilion felt more and more confident because of Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru, what do you mean? Qi Rongji came over angrily. After coming in, she sat on the stone bench opposite Qin Wanru and said angrily, What do I mean? What does first Miss Qi ask? Qin Wanru said calmly, You just instigated me to come forward to say those words and do those things. What is your intention? Qin Wanru, I can't imagine that you are so vicious at such a young age. Do you want Madame of Duke Xing to hate me? Qi Rongji raised her eyebrows and said loudly, with her face flushed with anger. What benefits do I get by doing this? Qin Wanru said lightly. Qi Rongji was like this. No matter what she did, as long as she made a mistake, it would be someone else's fault. She would always put the blame on others. Whether it was right or not, she was always right and innocent. In the past, she didn't understand why Qi Rongji treated her so cruelly, but now she understood. Since Qi Rongji couldn't push the blame on Qin Yuru, it was the most appropriate to push it on herself. Some people were born mean and vicious, such as Qi Rongji and Qin Yuru. You are trying to win the favor of Madame of Duke Xing. Qi Rongji was stunned by the question, but then she said angrily, I don't want to win the favor of Madame of Duke Xing, nor do I want to become the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing, so I don't have any intention. Qin Wanru smiled a little coldly. Nonsense. You are greedy for the wealth of Duke Xing's mansion, so you deliberately did this to make Madame of Duke Xing think that I have a bad character and you have a good character. Qin Wanru, I really misjudged you. Your character is so bad. Qi Rongji said harshly and stared at Qin Wanru. She thought so. So the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. She couldn't sit still and directly came to find Qin Wanru. Character? Qi Rongji, how dare you talk to me about character? Do you have such a thing? Qin Wanru narrowed her eyes, but her eyes were as sharp as a knife. Her eyes seemed to pierce through the deepest darkness of Qi Rongji, making her uncomfortable. She tilted her head, but immediately turned back and stared at Qin Wanru again, saying, "What nonsense are you talking about?" She didn't feel guilty when she said this in front of others, but in front of Qin Wanru she did feel guilty, which reminded her of all the things she had done to Qin Wanru in the past. But no matter how guilty she was, Qi Rongji felt that she couldn't have stage fright. She couldn't deal with Qin Wanru. "Qi Rongji, I don't care what you want to do, but I have to tell you one thing. I don't like Madam of Duke Xing, so I won't be the adopted daughter of Madam of Duke Xing. If you have the means, just do it yourself. I won't rob you." Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and smiled more calmly. "You really won't?" Qi Rongji was stunned at first, and then she was overjoyed. She raised her head and put on an arrogant expression. "You swear that if you have any idea about Duke Xing's mansion, you will die a horrible death, and all the people in your Qin's mansion will die a horrible death. Qi Rongji, who do you think you are?" Qin Wanru smiled, and her smile was a little cold. Qi Rongji couldn't help shivering, and inexplicably felt that there was a kind of chill in the air, which penetrated into her bone marrow. "I said I don't want to. As for other things, Qi Rongji, you should know that you are an orphan in our mansion now. Madam D and Big Sister may owe you, but my mother, grandmother, and I don't owe you anything. If I really want to drive you out at this time, what do you think will happen?" Qin Wanru stood up and smiled. "You, what do you mean?" Qi Rongji also stood up in a hurry and stepped back vigilantly, feeling a little guilty inexplicably. "What do you mean? Don't you know? Qi Rongji, you have no foundation in the capital now. You can't compare with me." Qin Wanru smiled disdainfully, looked her up and down with her watery eyes, and then smiled slightly, turned and walked out of the pavilion. Yu Jie, who was behind her, also tilted her head and looked at Qi Rongji curiously. She also smiled with a little sarcasm, and then chased after Qin Wanru. Behind her, Qi Rongji was trembling with anger. She slammed her hand on the stone table in front of her and gritted her teeth. She wanted to cut Qin Wanru into pieces. How dare she talk to her like this? Where was the gentle and naive Qin Wanru? Why did she suddenly seem to be a different person? "Miss, don't be impulsive. This is the Ningyuan Army General's mansion in the capital." Chuanyi, who came with her, was afraid that she would really rush out, and hurriedly reached out to stop her. "Do you also think that I can't do anything to her?" Qi Rongji asked, gritting her teeth. I dare not." Chuanyi hurriedly lowered her head, for fear that Qi Rongji would vent her anger on her. "Humph, a bastard. Does she really think that she is a miss from an aristocratic family? I must let people know that she is actually not the daughter of Ningyuan Army General." Qi Rongji was so angry that her face turned blue. She wished that she could see Qin Wanru's hateful face in front of her. She must tear her face off. "Miss I, she comes again." Chuanyi stammered and reminded Qi Rongji. Qi Rongji looked up and immediately took 2 steps back. She stared closely at Qin Wanru, who unexpectedly walked back slowly. Her face turned blue and purple. She clearly knew that she really had no ability to fight with Qin Wanru now. "First, Miss Qi, if you don't want to be driven out of Ningyuan Army General's mansion, you should obediently hide in the guest yard and don't make trouble anywhere. I heard that it was you who first exposed Big Sister's matter." Qin Wanru came over with a friendly smile and a low voice. But when it fell on Qi Rongji's ears, it was like thunder, so that she almost couldn't stand still. She hurriedly reached out to hold the side of the pavilion and looked at Qin Wanru with shock and horror. Such a secret matter, except for herself, only her brother knew. How could Qin Wanru know it? "Do you think that why I know it? Qi Rongji, there is no impenetrable wall in this world. If Father and Madame D know that it is because of you, what do you think they will do?" Qin Wanru smiled more and more gently, but Qi Rongji felt that this smile was cold and horrible. Subconsciously, she held the pillar tightly and her face turned pale. Obviously, she wanted to curse as before, but at this time, she felt that Qin Wanru was very dangerous, so she didn't dare to. Glancing at Qi Rongji contemptuously, Qin Wanru directly left this time without looking back. In the pavilion, Qi Rongji calmed down. Looking at Qin Wanru's back, she gritted her teeth. This matter was not over. It was imperative for her to become the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing. Qin Wanru's behavior just now also made her realize that only by becoming the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing could she trample on Qin Wanru again. Chapter 250. Qi Tianyu and Qi Baiyu were invited the next day. They went to Qi Rongji's guest house together. "Big brother, you are finally here." Seeing Qi Tianyu standing at the door, Qi Rongji ran out excitedly. But when she saw Qi Baiyu behind Qi Tianyu, she immediately stopped, rolled her eyes at Qi Baiyu, and said unhappily, "Big brother, why is he here?" "Don't be rude. Call me second brother." Qi Tianyu's face darkened slightly. "Second brother?" Although Qi Rongji was unwilling, she still called him obediently. Then she pointed at the outside of the courtyard and said, "Second brother, please walk around by yourself. I have something important to say to you." Then she pulled Qi Tianyu into the courtyard, leaving Qi Baiyu alone outside the courtyard. Qi Tianyu turned back and said to Qi Baiyu with humility, "Second brother, please wait outside. I will leave after saying a few words." Qi Baiyu twitched his mouth and nodded indifferently. He didn't walk away casually. Looking around, he found a corridor outside the courtyard to lean against and enjoy the scenery. Although Qin's mansion was small, the scenery was good, especially the guest house, which was full of ingenuity. The rockery was exquisite, the trees were tall, and the slightly raised eaves were also unique. "Big brother, do you know that Qin Wanru is not General Qin's biological daughter?" As soon as they entered the room, Qi Rongji sent everyone out and asked hurriedly, "What's wrong?" Qi Tianyu frowned and said unhappily, "Big brother, I know you know it. Father and mother must have evidence in your hands." Qi Rongji said hurriedly, and reached out to pull Qi Tianyu's sleeve and said coquettishly, "Big brother, spread the evidence." "What do you want to do?" Qi Tianyu's face changed slightly, but he didn't deny it. "I want to recognize Madame of Duke Xing as my adoptive mother, but Madame of Duke Xing can't decide whether to recognize me or Qin Wanru. As long as Qin Wanru's real identity is revealed and Madame of Duke Xing knows that Qin Wanru is just picked up, Madame of Duke Xing will definitely not choose her." Qi Rongji said confidently. "Madame of Duke Xing?" Qi Tianyu was slightly stunned and looked at Qi Rongji suspiciously. He had always been very clear about his younger sister's ability and did not think that she would have any relationship with Madame of Duke Xing. "It's true. Madame of Duke Xing came to Qin's mansion yesterday and also gave me a gift." Qi Rongji shook her ears. The pair of earrings on her ears were shining brightly. Even though Qi Tianyu did not know much about this kind of jewelry, he knew that they were exquisite. Is this true? How much benefit would this benefit him? His handsome eyes looked at Qi Rongji and became a little deeper. "Wanru wants to compete with you for the identity of the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing?" "Yes, she is such a person. She used to snatch Qin Yuru's, and now she wants to snatch mine. She doesn't know how lowly she is and whether she deserves it or not." Qi Rongji sneered harshly. In fact, she had known this matter for a long time, so she unscrupulously bullied Qin Wanru because she knew that Madame D would not stand up for Qin Wanru. Qi Tianyu frowned and said nothing. "Big brother, you are not really nice to this bitch, are you?" Qi Rongji looked at Qi Tianyu in a fuss. "Nonsense." Qi Tianyu's eyes showed a little displeasure and his expression became cold. "I won't say it. Big brother, please help me. If I become the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing, I can directly live in Duke Xing's mansion. In this way, no matter what I do, I will have the support of Duke Xing's mansion. It will even help you in the Imperial examination." Qi Rongji shook Qi Tianyu's sleeves coquettishly. "Does Madame of Duke Xing like you?" Qi Tianyu did not answer and asked after thinking for a while. "Yes, big brother, please believe me. She really likes me. You can know how much she likes me when you see the gifts she gave me. I heard that the first miss of Madame of Duke Xing has not been with her these days. If I go to Duke Xing's mansion, she will definitely think more of me. But if I can't go there, I will lose everything." Qi Rongji became more and more anxious. "Big brother, please help me. If I get better, you will also get better. We are brother and sister. How can I be worse than an outsider?" Qi Tianyu fell silent again and did not speak for a long time. Qi Rongji waited for a while and saw that he did not speak, so she became anxious. When she was about to say something, she saw him raise his head and say, "Okay, I promise you, but you also promise me." Speaking of this, he hesitated for a while and did not continue. What Qi Rongji said was reasonable, but Qi Tianyu did not think that he should show all his cards at this time. "Big brother, don't worry, I will not do anything to Qin Wanru." Qi Rongji smiled knowingly and nodded repeatedly. Qi Tianyu frowned and did not speak immediately. After a while, he stood up and said, "Then I will go back first. Be careful. This is Qin's mansion in the capital city. We have no foundation here." Since the matter had been achieved, Qi Rongji was also full of joy and would listen to whatever he said at this time. "Big brother, don't worry. I will be careful. We have no foundation in the capital city, so we need to urgently find a foundation. Duke Xing's mansion is very good. With the foundation of Duke Xing's mansion, it will be good for both you and me." What she said was true, and the meaning in it was more thought-provoking. Qi Tianyu took a deep breath, nodded and walked out. Qi Rongji walked him to the door, and then rolled her eyes at Qi Tianyu who was in the corridor outside. She did not say anything to him and went back to the yard gracefully. Seeing Qi Tianyu coming out, Qi Baiyu jumped out of the corridor and came to Qi Tianyu very quickly. "Big brother, don't blame her. She has always been careless and always thinks that she is still in Jiangzhou." Qi Tianyu sighed and his elegant eyes fell on Qi Baiyu. "If there is anything, please forgive her for the sake of you, big brother. In the future, she will marry someone else, and we will still be in the mansion." This meant that Qi Rongji would not be a member of the Qi family in the future. Moreover, Qi Rongji was too old to stay in the family for a long time. After she got married, she would not have much relationship with the Qi family. It implied that he and Qi Baiyu were the real mainstays of the Qi family. "Big brother, don't worry. I won't argue with third sister. Is she living well here? Did she quarrel with anyone?" Qi Baiyu nodded, squinted and said casually, "Ningyuan Army General's mansion is very good to her. She is living well here, but she has a childish temper, and sometimes she will throw a tantrum in the boudoir. Forget it, let's go. As long as she knows that she is not in Jiangzhou." Qi Tianyu said helplessly. He slightly shook his head and turned to walk out with his hands clasped behind his back. Qi Baiyu's lips curved slightly. He suddenly took 2 steps forward and asked, "Big brother, should we go and see Ningyuan Army General? We are already in the mansion. If we don't go and see him, I am afraid it will be inappropriate. We should go and see him. Let's go." Although Qi Tianyu did not have any idea before, he thought it made sense now. He turned and walked in another direction. When Qi Tianyu and Qi Baiyu arrived at Qin Huaiyong's study, Qin Wanru happened to be coming out of Qin Huaiyong's study. Seeing the 2 brothers opposite, she deliberately stopped and bowed to them. Then she stood up and made way for them. She wanted to leave after they went in. "Second miss." Qi Tianyu suddenly stopped her, but this was not the way he used to call her. "What's the matter, first young Master Qi?" Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes and said calmly, "What's the matter, General Qin?" Qi Tianyu's eyes fell on Qin Wanru's exquisite and beautiful face. His eyes became a little more serious, but his expression was also calm, as if they had never said that they would fight until one of them was dead. "Father is free now. You can ask the servant to inform him," Qin Wanru said calmly. "My sister lives in your mansion. Thank you for your care." Qi Tianyu bowed deeply to Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru moved aside and did not accept his bow. "First young Master Qi, you are too polite. Your sister's matter was arranged by grandma and mother. It has nothing to do with me." Although his words were polite, they were very cold. It seemed that he did not want to have anything to do with Qi Rongji. "I have something to do here. I can't accompany you too." Qin Wanru bowed again politely and then slowly left with Yujia. Qi Tianyu stood still and looked at Qin Wanru with an unknown meaning. After a long time, he lowered his eyes and slowly asked the servant to ask to see him. Then the servant in the study went to inform Qin Huaiyong. Qin Huaiyong invited them in. "Miss, Why do you ask them to see the general at this time? Yujie saw the Qi brothers enter Qin Huayong's study together and asked in a low voice with confusion. In fact, they didn't leave. They just stopped at a nearby corridor. Yujie didn't speak until she saw the Qi brothers go in. Father is asking about Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Wanru's smile was so faint that it was almost invisible. Only a trace of ridicule could be seen in her eyes. Why doesn't Madame of Duke Xing give up? Why does she like Miss so much? Although Yujie grew up in Jingxin Monastery and did not know much about the ways of the world, the more she thought about it, the more she felt it was strange. What does she want from Miss? Just now, Nanny Dong came to report that it was faintly spread outside that second Miss Qin wanted to worship Madame of Duke Xing as her adoptive mother. Moreover, it was said that Madame of Duke Xing came to Qin's mansion yesterday for this matter. Now there was some progress in this matter. This matter was just mentioned yesterday, but today it had already spread outside. Since the people of Qin's mansion did not spread it, it must be spread by the people of Duke Xing's mansion. Such a noble aristocratic family had extremely strict family rules. There was only one reason why such a thing with so many loopholes would be spread out. Madame of Duke Xing deliberately let people spread it in this way. Of course, the purpose was to force Qin Wanru to have no choice but to worship her as her adoptive mother. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.